Guys, 2014's Grand Budapest Hotel, Wes Anderson's love letter to a fading Europe as World War encroaches. Here we are talking about this movie. It's the second Wes on the Rewatchables. Andy and I did Tenenbaums last year, I believe.
How'd that go?
Very well.
It was very gentle. I want to say it's an honor to be back here. I love listening to you guys. You always have a good time. You're talking about big tent movies. You laugh a lot, Twister, Cruising. And then when it's time to put on the pince nez, you call me up with my cardigan.
Our little dainty boy
Yeah.
here.
The Belle and Sebastian fans.
It's like the time Doris Kearns Goodwin was on The Man Show.
That's right.
So happy.
I know that we were kicking around ideas of what we're going to do in Bill's absence, Vacation Bill. So we're filling in. We had dodgeball last week. That was awesome. And then I was asking Andy, like, Bill's like, you and Andy, you guys should knock one out. And I was like, well, we were kicking some ideas around, and this one just kept coming up, even though we had done a West before. But Sean, I wanted to start with you. Why is a movie about the rise of fascism, young love, and the service industry so goddamn rewatchable?
Well, I think it's an apotheosis of whatever we think Wes Anderson is.
Yeah.
So it might be him executing most completely on the cliches of Wes Anderson. So it feels like very legible to a broader audience. But I will say, I remain a little bit confused by this being his biggest and most successful movie. And I was kind of hoping we could talk about that. This movie was a huge hit.
$174 million worldwide.
Which is fascinating to think about. It feels like it could not, something like that would not happen for a movie like this today. But it is, on its face, very funny adventure movie.
Yeah.
And it has great set pieces. It has a cavalcade of actors that you enjoy spending time with. And it's got a lead performance that is like for the ages. That it is like, I think this legendary English performer, perhaps at his very best. So if there's a lot to recommend it.
Yeah, there is definitely.
Sean, you don't think a movie about the creeping rise of fascism hits in 2024?
I guess it is resonant in some ways.
Okay.
I have some notes on his perspective on this time in history as well.
It was a much debated topic in 2014 when it came out. I'm sure that there's like a school of thought that he treats this topic maybe too lightly or too obliquely by like filling the frame with all these confections and kind of taking a step back from it, not looking at it dead in the eye. But I think that there's other parts of it that certainly suggest like what you want to maintain in the face of something dark rising. Andy, what is it about this movie that you find rewatchable?
I mean, I definitely agree with Sean that I was very surprised at the time that this was in many ways his mainstream breakthrough. Because I think that for me, as someone who, and I feel like you guys are the same, has been a fan of Wes Anderson from the beginning and has a very, very deep, very personal, very rewatchable connection to those first three movies, to Bottle Rocket, Rushmore, and Tenenbaums. I felt like I was a little bit in the wilderness with my own relationship to him and his movies during the subsequent years, Life Aquatic, Darjeeling. And the thing about this movie that really struck me at the time and then strikes me harder every time I watch it is that for me, this is the pivot point from a certain kind of sentimentality about his movies where he felt, with good reason, that he was sort of exploring the doll's house nostalgia of his youth and things like Lost Love. This was the time when it switched from sentimental to elegiac, and it became less about being nostalgic for like childhood things, and more about loving beauty and loving art
And old women.
and loving deeply and elder sex, which we're going to talk about. But this idea that destruction. So like getting older is inevitable, which is something that I feel like his characters grapple with to varying degrees in all of his movies. But the destruction, fascism, like the crippling boot of autocracy is not necessarily inevitable. It just keeps happening. And there's something that it was just, still it sort of hits me crossways how sad suddenly the movie is, in spite of all of its lightness and charm.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned like that this is the apotheosis of what we think of him. And I think that there's something to that. If you were going to be the most unkind, I think you could describe a certain phase of his career. I would probably start it with Moonrise Kingdom and do this and Asteroid City and French Dispatch, all of those movies I adore. But you could say it's like hipster Merchant Ivory. Mm-hmm. So it's period pieces that are essentially low impact when it comes to like the chaos on screen. I mean, they can be chaotic, but they're not flashbang action movies or anything like that. There is a degree of distance that the audience can have from the subject matter because of the sort of costumey, like we're putting on a play elements to it.
Yeah,
Like
well, everything's a box inside of a box.
it's a box
inside
inside of a box.
play.
But each one of those films has like a very sad, traumatized emotional core, and most of them are incredibly funny, like really, really funny. This one I think is the funniest. I think because of Fiennes, it becomes like this actually quite profane, violent movie throughout.
Very much.
And even Anderson's talked about how like he'd never made a movie before where there's basically a dead body every 10 minutes and people are getting torn up and maimed and stabbed.
It's a full-blown shootout.
Yeah. So I think that...
Wait. No one gets shot, I mean, in the shootout.
but like the guy
but
gets
there is a
stabbed in
shootout. There are lots of guns.
I
There are a
feel-
couple of guns in Life Aquatic, but it is not something that you see frequently in his movies.
Someone loses their fingers. That's
Right.
the most violent.
Yeah,
No, the
yeah.
dude gets stabbed when they're escaping. The guys who were stabbing each other, he's like, let's call it a draw.
That's true, but then there's a joke.
But yeah, I think that there's something to this movie that transcends like Wes Anderson, where it starts to become like deeply funny or deeply sad or whatever. And I actually am fine just staying completely at surface level Wes Anderson.
Right.
No, but I think it goes back to what I was trying to say is that like this is fundamentally, there are broken boys in this movie, but this is not a movie about broken boys. This is a movie about a lost era, about a broken promise of a century in a way.
Don't
And I
knock
feel
broken
like
boys. They built this country.
there
you
are
know?
3 of us sitting around this table right now. And if you want to pivot to dad talk, we can do it.
I am in
But-
two, for sure.
No, but I feel like the more time passes with this movie, it does bizarrely seem that this is his broadest brush, even though he only ever paints with the finest, what is it? Indian Paintbrush is the production
This is a
company.
production company.
That is essentially the benefactor of the
Stephen
Wes
Rails is
Anderson
the
mission.
Medici
Yeah, which is, I think it has been a truly amazing project in American movies in the last 25 years. Like I'm just with Andy. Those first 3 movies were very impactful for me, and I have really appreciated, with some distance, the last 5 movies, with the exception of Moonrise Kingdom, which I think is like kind of his
Tweed.
but like his
His
masterpiece.
Tweed Stairway
Like,
to Heaven.
Yes, it is truly him like finally accessing the emotional core that he had been building towards, and he is now on this journey of taking apart, deconstructing things he loves and rebuilding them, and surprising you with the choices he makes in the rebuild. So things are very architectural now in Wes Anderson movies, and they're very story within a song, within a book, within an author's mind. So it's fun to unpack those things. It's harder for them to hit me on an emotional level. I agree with you that because this movie is so funny, it doesn't trip you up as much. Asteroid City was a movie that came out last year. A lot of people loved it. I definitely needed to watch it a second time to feel like I could wrap my head around what it was he was trying to accomplish with that movie.
Chris, what's your count on Asteroid City currently?
3, I think. Yeah, I think I saw
climbing.
it once in theaters, once when it was on Peacock, and once on a plane. And the plane one was one where I was like, holy shit, this movie's like really, really deep. And also, I think a lot of his films are either prescient or very reflective of the time they're made in. They just don't actually state it outright. So Asteroid was about these people quarantining and reflecting on their lives. And I thought that wound up being quite poignant.
Well, I think that to that point, it'll come up as we talk about it, that some works of art are just sort of prescient, and Grand Budapest Hotel coming out in 2014 before a sort of rightward surge on the global stage is interesting and noteworthy and might have added to its resonance. But I would also say maybe as the resident, well, at least emeritus head of Daddington Island, Sean, you moved recently.
Yes, I have a dinghy.
The 3 broken boys in their dinghy. Was one of the Roald Dahl shorts he did. I feel like one of the most important Wes Anderson movies to think about in relation to this one is Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is, I think, unquestionably one of his best movies. Definitely the one I've rewatched the most due to the children in my household. But I feel like
They're not Darjeeling heads yet?
No,
Daddy, what is in that dropper?
Getting stoned to Claire de Lune.
I think they're pretty into the my dad's dead part or my son's dead part of Life Aquatic.
Yeah.
Fantastic Mr. Fox is a movie in which he absolutely was given free rein to play with toys. I mean, just clay figurines from a childhood book. But some of the filmmaking tricks that he used in that movie are almost like one-to-one mapped onto this one, including like Willem Dafoe as a exaggerated villainous rat. And so there was something about Sean, as the big picture host, you could probably talk more intelligently about some of the filmmaking tricks and techniques that he used in this, whether it was the scale models throughout or the stop motion that gets used, which in a surprising way. But this movie feels like he's taking those toys and putting them into the service of a larger, more interesting, more emotional story. And I feel like that's an important distinction to make too, as he pivoted, because you can definitely find these moments in his career. Where
I was going to go through the phases,
thing.
but I mean, I don't know if you wanted to respond to that, but like I think that
I'll just say it's a grand scale period piece.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the reason why I think it works so well and it feels so momentous relative to something like Moonrise Kingdom or something like French Dispatch, which, they're just inherently smaller stories. This is a big story.
Yeah.
Even though it's about a concierge.
And technically dazzling. Unbelievable when you watch this movie, the level of skill and just precision and also decision-making of how he wants to shoot it and what sort of shots and tricks he's going to deploy in the service of the story, not just to stunt.
I kind of think that there is the difference between, so I would put Wes Anderson's career goes Bottle Rocket and Rushmore. I think you can make the argument that those constitute a first phase of his career because this is indie roots. He hooks up with James L. Brooks. Mm-hmm. They make Bottle Rocket as a feature. Owen Wilson, his relationship with the Wilson brothers is there, and it's like they're making these kind of...
You could talk about Luke right now, and you're not.
I'm saving Luke for later.
Okay, all right.
And then I think Tenenbaum's Life Aquatic and Darjeeling mark a second period, interestingly, like a kind of almost, I would say, descending in order of collective love of those movies. Like I think Tenenbaum's is acknowledged as like one of his 2 or 3 best films. Life Aquatic, I really, really like a lot, but like I think was actually the movie that people were like, this guy is annoying now. Like right when that came out.
I think it's when some of those cliches I'm talking about started to settle in, where it was like, oh, a complicated patriarch and his adopted son as a concept, which is a theme that this movie has too. Like he has these archetypal structures that he returns to over and over again. And that was the first time that you were like, oh, he only has so many pitches.
There was just also a lot of dudes in Brooklyn who went as Steve Zissou for Halloween and then never changed out of it.
I did eventually change out of it, but yeah, I mean, that literally happened. I was one of those boys.
Andy, did Wes Anderson show you the wonders of Tropicalia with that movie?
I mean, aesthetically, there is no question that every choice he made was hugely influential.
Yeah.
But I think that what you're talking about, this is the benefit of a long career, which, very few people get to have a career like he's had and continues to have. But you see him struggle in real time with stuff and try to respond in some ways to some of the criticism, but within the structure of his own muse.
Yeah, sometimes he throws up a middle finger as like, I'm going even further into my diorama.
Yes, yeah. But all of his movies are unquestionably his movies. He never, tries a different style. But some of the kind of like rough evolution of, okay, now my movies are going to be coming from an adult perspective on adulthood instead of from a childish perspective. And sometimes you'd feel him like push everything in the middle and being like, and now there's going to be a naked lady in this one scene. Or a guy's going to say the F word.
Yeah.
Like that'll show him. And it does feel like someone in a prep school uniform giving the finger. And then for me, the moment when it pivoted into more adulthood is when he made a kids movie, honestly.
Yeah.
It freed something. And I do think the movies after that are a lot more in his bag. Like it makes sense now. This is an adult making these movies with slightly larger concerns.
I will say the one thing that I do miss about him that this movie has a little bit of in M. Gustav, but not as much as I would like, is the angst of Rushmore and Darjeeling, where there are characters who are deeply unsatisfied with their lives and the way that things are going, and they are fighting against a kind of system to break that. And Gustav has a little bit of that, but he's so mannered. And so and manners matter to him so much that he can only go so far. And in fact, he meets an end because he's only willing to go so far. But that is the one thing as he is in this like heavily diorama-sized era that I'm like, is there any like grit left for you? Is there any like rage left? And that's something like when you have a lot of success and you get into your 40s and 50s, some of those things start to fall away. And it feels like that has fallen away from him.
Sean, use I statements when you say that.
Sorry. As I get into my 40s.
A high T filmmaker. Like I don't think his characters rage with a lot of like super masculine energy. Not actually like atypical for this pod. Like we talk a lot about dudes screaming, and Gustav is actually probably the closest to that he has as a protagonist who does that. Like I think it was interesting to read about his casting decision of Ralph Fiennes. He was clearly like basically wrote the part for him, but was like, choose what part you want to play, but Gustav is for you. And he gets this incredible actor who's obviously really well trained and has talked a lot about and a lot of people have talked about his improvisatory skills. But Wes Anderson's somebody who's like, you have to hit this mark. You have to be within these 3 lines that you can't even see that are behind you. And I need you to read the line more or less the way I exactly
entirely.
imagine. Entirely.
You can't even change a participle.
Within that, Fiennes somehow like fills up the frame. Like, I think this is the best performance in a Wes Anderson movie. This is one of my favorite performances of this decade, probably of the 2010s.
That's an interesting conversation. That's a bold statement.
I mean, I think that there are lots of amazing Wes Anderson movies. I think this is the one that successfully pushes the speed limit on what you can do within a film that he has written and directed.
I also think it is worth, Sean, you were picking up on this too, the evolution of the male archetype in the Wes Anderson movies, which is basically, and I think this is influenced by his own childhood with a complicated relationship with his own father, obviously.
A filmmaker?
I know. Thank God.
My God.
Thank God podcasters are immune. The idea he had of a man in the world, or at least a successful man in the world, is a bullshitting peacock with a broken heart.
Yeah.
And you see that from Herman Bloom in Rushmore. You see that certainly in Royal Tenenbaum. But the Ray Fiennes version of that, there is a different note to it. And I think maybe this is a conversation to be had. Is it the evolution of Wes Anderson, the filmmaker? Is it the setting and the context of this movie? Is it the casting? Or is it or is it a combination of all of that? Because to me, the scene that sticks out amidst all of the hilarity and all of the air de panache, even at the lowest, dirtiest, prison-smellingest moments, is that first almost passing reference to how Monsieur Gustave took every meal alone in his room.
Yeah.
That tells you 70% of the character, or in a way that everything else he does is informed by that moment. When he's sitting alone in his little, what's he wearing? What do you call those things?
Oh, the
little
like
socks,
lederhosen? Suspender socks,
yeah.
I feel like, Sean, you worked at GQ. You knew it. Remember when those
I'm wearing
were back?
them right now, actually, Andy, and I'd like to show you them.
They're more of an Opus Dei thing. They're not actually for fashion.
Did you bring your whip with you for this pod? I think it's not unfair to say or unreasonable to say that he's Ben Stiller or Luke Wilson in the Royal Tenenbaums. He's M. Gustave in this movie. I mean, M. Gustave is Wes.
Yeah.
He has gotten older. That idea of a world becoming increasingly uncivilized is something that he is reflecting on and remarking upon. I personally think it's a little bit of a load of shit. I think he exists in a very rarefied experience
You
of
mean
the world.
Character is a load
Wes Anderson.
Okay.
Which is not a criticism of Wes Anderson because he has constructed this amazing life for himself and he has earned it. But he has a kind of longing that you are identifying for something that is gone that, like, I tend to feel is not always ever really there.
So does it matter that the F. Murray Abraham's version of Zero at the end of the movie is like, they're like, is it, did you keep the hotel because of Gustave? And he's like, like, yeah, but like, I think he longed for a world that never existed. Like, he is aware of that. It's a little bit of a self-reflexive criticism.
And that's why he's not Zero to me. He's Gustave.
Right.
Like, Zero is the modern practical person who's like, life has always been shit.
Yeah.
Like,
totally. But he allows room for both.
Yeah, he does.
And we can talk about it when we get to the scene where he's talking about, the pile of filthy carpets and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, Sean, your point is an important one because one will, and in fact, I already did try to make sort of pretentious political allegories out of this movie. But I think the most important one, as it so often is who is the filmmaker in this and what is he saying? And this movie, more explicitly maybe than any other movie he made, asked the question, what is the value of the aesthete in a broken world? Mm-hmm. Like, what am I actually contributing when I care about pomp, circumstance, beautiful things, frippery, balalaika on the score, and everybody else wants to join the MCU? Right? Sean, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm going to go see Deadpool and Wolverine again, I think.
Yeah.
I think I should see it 3 times.
Speaking of a diorama.
Sean, I saw a tweet that said the fight at the end was pure cinema. Would you like to respond on the record on the
puerile cinema? I agree. Well put.
Nicely done.
We talked a little bit about the films, like the proposition that Wes Anderson presents to you, especially with this most recent phase of his career, where it's like every single thing is designed down to the stationery. Right? Like, there is not a single detail in these movies that is left unconsidered, which honestly I find is the reason why I enjoy going back and watching these movies. You can watch this movie with the sound off if you want.
Yeah.
Like, not only is I think some of the gestures of the acting conveys story without even needing to like hear the dialogue, which itself is pretty incredible. But I think that you can also just like appreciate it for the production design and all the set design stuff and just like these small camera moves. I was talking with Jack before we started and he was like, this movie made me remember why I went to film school, because I watched the behind the scenes of the grip, like shoving these guys down the fake mountain. And it's just like, this is kind of movie magic at its most palpable.
I think this is also a really important thing to say about this too, which is for all the criticism, maybe this is a straw man argument, but I kind of don't think it is. When people are like, oh, Wes Anderson is just, he locks himself in his room with his dollhouses and he lives in his private little universe. A movie is not a private universe. He has to go into the world and find trusted collaborators and designers and artists and locations and make it a reality through the incredible blood, sweat, and tears and collaboration of dozens, if not hundreds of people. The accomplishment of that alone is just astounding when you think about how precise every single thing is, where there's not a frame in this movie where you watch it and you're like, that could have gone a different way. That could have been a different choice there. It feels, it's a closed circuit in a way that feels very rare.
He raises a lot of interesting questions about how much you care and want to think about virtuosity while watching a movie.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the greatest filmmakers of all time, John Ford, Akira Kurosawa, Steven Spielberg,
Howard Hawks, whatever.
Whoever, but especially like visual masters are well known for creating this like epic feeling inside you when you see something beautiful that they've imagined. But it is not meant to feel like you're watching a movie. You have been enveloped by the images that they're creating. Wes Anderson is the opposite. Wes Anderson, his style draws attention to artifice very purposefully. So like in this movie in particular, if you look at the way that he moves the camera, he's always moving the camera to where he wants the action to go.
Mm-hmm.
So it's moving from left to right down a hallway and the character will appear in the hallway as the camera turns. That's very unusual, especially in a constructed environment like the ones that he works in. And it makes you feel like you're watching someone make a movie.
Yeah.
Which is a weird feeling to have. And this movie, more than any of his other movies, I feel that. I feel this idea of like, it's like when you're opening a pop-up book and it is so different because you can't even read the words on the page. You can only experience that tactile thing that pops up in front of your face. So it's disorienting in a way to watch a movie like this. It's doubly disorienting because I'm personally, when I watch this movie, so invested in Gustav because he's so funny and so interesting and so present but unknowable that it creates this like distorted effect. Like Moonrise Kingdom, when I watch that, I don't feel this thing I'm describing.
Do you feel distanced from the emotional inner life of the character?
I think I just know that I'm inside of a story. And if it has more of a fairy tale
That's
feel,
fair.
you know?
So it's not a counter like be like, you should feel differently. It's more of like, I agree with you. And that is almost why when the true human moments hit in this movie, they hit so hard to me.
Yeah.
Because they're like, he pulls the bottom out of this magic trick that he's had going, and you realize whatever these people are experiencing or what people have been experiencing for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Right.
Which is like, I thought I sort of had created this reality for myself, and then forces beyond my control came and like literally ran over them. And that's a pretty, I think, universal human experience from the dawn of time. And yet he creates like this fantasy world, so that you're almost not even thinking about it. And even as like the frontier closes, and at first it's Ed Norton and he's like kind of nice. And it's like, oh yeah. And then as it gets more and more real, until there's almost this like distancing technique by shooting the final Gustav, Agatha, Zero moment in black and white.
You're the first of the official death squads to whom we've been formally introduced.
Yeah. And, but like the actual narration of how did it end? And it's like, they shot him in the end,
Yeah, but it's such a tricky thing because I think he is pulling punches in an effort to remain unsaccharine.
Yeah.
Because, like, in particular, I think of this, we're like at the end of the movie here with what we're talking about, but Zero yada-yadaing Agatha and his infant child's death, but then spending all this time on Gustav being hauled off and beaten up by the SS is a really interesting choice about a person who's like trying to show you everything and nothing at the same time.
Absolutely. All these guys are. All the people in this movie are I mean, why is the Jude Law, Tom Wilkinson character there in the first place?
But it's also saying something about storytelling, which is that everything is subjective, and most lives, if you live long enough, have a relatively equivalent amount of joy and sadness. And when you're telling someone the story, you're telling someone a story with intent, and which parts you tell and which parts you hide. And sometimes the parts you hide are even more revealing.
Yeah.
And the sadness at, we can call Mr. Mustafa as the F. Murray Abraham version of Zero, is what you're meant to be left with. You know, that he was trapped ever since that moment, that his life in many ways ended, even though his wealth began.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's worth noting. So to go through it, the story of Grand Budapest Hotel is being read by a girl in a graveyard.
Yes.
She's reading a copy of a book called The Grand Budapest Hotel that was written by an author who is played first by Tom Wilkinson.
In quote-unquote contemporary times, yeah.
But was actually a young Jude Law who wrote a book from his own perspective about a visit to a now decaying Soviet-era hotel in which he met Mr. Mustafa, who then over dinner told him this story more or less verbatim.
Yes.
Sure. No, it's easy.
That was well recited.
Yeah.
Do you want to mention Stefan
It's
Zweig?
worth. So at this point, this film
also why
in
you called me.
some ways is an adaptation. Not explicitly, but there's an Austrian writer named Stefan Zweig who had a very prolific writing career and a very tragic end to his life in Brazil, where he took his own life as World War II was really exploding, in 1942. He is the film is dedicated to him. It's inspired by his writings. Specifically, I'm going to say this because with lack of emotion, because I haven't read these books, but The Great Betrayal, and especially Post Office Girl, which is set in a hotel and is about, I believe it's like about an Austrian girl who's living with an American aunt in a Swiss hotel. He does a lot of things with these framing devices, these kind of like descending steps of introducing you to a story. A young boy meets an old man who tells him a story about when he was a young boy, et cetera, et cetera. Have you read any of his stuff?
Just a little bit, but I think that From the World of Yesterday, which is a book that I think in many ways, it's more of a memoir, but in many ways influenced Wes Anderson as much as it influenced the movie. This is a book that he wrote near the end of his life, where he talks about like his own life in segments, like chapters, literally like there were chapters in my life. And he lived a life that is totally impossible, even possible to imagine. Born to an intellectual Jewish family and then went to school and was published when he was 19 and then traveled so widely and crossed paths with almost every major figure of the early 20th century, from poets in England to I think he wrote a personal letter to Mussolini at one point to help save someone's life. Traveled to India, traveled to Russia, traveled to the United States, and the type of life that I think that we thought was possible when the internet was started in the blogosphere.
Absolutely,
that's right.
Yeah.
But literally in the sense that he was writing plays and essays and hobnobbing with intellectuals and artists in every country, and noticing that he was born at a time what he thought was of great, great promise and freedom.
Yeah.
They were coming out of an era of repression and into a stable Austria where arts could be celebrated and there were more sexual freedoms and culture, and that his Jewish family could be integrated into the mainstream of this and feel a part of it, and then to be absolutely sideswiped by World War I, because I think in one of his essays he talks about how no one really liked Archduke Ferdinand, so it really wasn't a big story.
I know.
Kind of a Joel Embiid situation.
Yeah.
There it is. What's the timestamp on that first stray?
How late is that, Craig, when he mentions Embiid the first time?
30 minutes, not bad.
Yeah. Somewhere Wes Anderson's listening to this and he wrote down in his moleskin, Joel Embiid, who is this?
My next film will be in Cameroon.
Speaking of global citizens who have disappointed us on the world stage, and then sort of rebuilding it, going back to Austria to be like, I can be part of the peace because we've learned our lesson and we won't let this happen again. Certainly not these brutish Nazis.
Yeah.
And then ending up in Brazil, again, kind of like utopian, like this is the world, this is the country of the future, the city of the future, only to commit suicide with his wife in 1942, basically being like, all I see is darkness.
Yeah.
His quote was, I think like the letter before his suicide was, I think it better to conclude in good time and in erect bearing a life in which intellectual labor meant the purest joy and personal freedom, the highest good on earth. And on that note, I am no longer podcasting.
That's Bill's take on the Rewatchables, I think. I think what the other thing that is
Stefan Zweig piece. Yeah.
I think the thing that's interesting about that author, whose work I have not read, but what I've read about him is that he wrote these sort of like emotionally heavy romantic novellas. But he's part of a generation of creative people from Austria, many of whom also fled before or during World War II. and went to Hollywood. And that's Ernst Lubitsch, that's Billy Wilder,
Mm-hmm.
that's all of these masters of what we come to understand as American cinema with a European perspective, who are huge influences on the movie Grand Budapest Hotel.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no Grand Budapest, because he's inspired by Zweig, but this is not a very Zweigian movie. It's a very Ernst Lubitsch movie. It's a very 1930s Alfred Hitchcock film. So it's fascinating that he is thinking so much about it and this kind of work. But it is a zany, fast-talking, fast-moving.
But so were those first movies. I mean, so was classic Hollywood. I think that's a really important point, that the vision of, not just the vision of Hollywood and of what movies are, but the vision of what America is and means was almost entirely built on the backs and on the labor and on the ideas of people who suffered a catastrophic break in what their sense of what peace or war meant.
And that's basically modernism anyway. Yeah.
And I think there's an element of this where, and a Zweig quote is, "But every shadow is ultimately also the daughter of light, and only he who has known light and darkness, war and peace, rise and fall, only this one has truly lived." And I wonder if on some level Wes Anderson is grappling with the fact that he doesn't really know those things. Many people who have grown up in like relative stability of the West in the last however many years don't know those things. And what does that say about the art, or what does it say about the zaniness? Like, how do you leaven it with something deeper?
I'll just do some stats here for old Grand Budapest Hotel. As I said, but budget of 25 mil, made 174 worldwide. Did very well in Germany.
Can you put that in Klubex?
These are the kind of movies that we wish we had half a dozen of, 8 of. It's a great model. Not all of them make 174, but seeing what he can get out of $25 million is pretty mind-blowing.
I think in the grand scheme of things, he's coming out net positive with all of his movies, financially, creatively. Like, obviously, he's adored by cinephiles, but his movies do well, and he's a brand. He is,
it's kind of,
and everybody wants to work with him for relative peanuts.
Yeah.
It's very much like, he reminds me of like when I was growing up, what Woody Allen was, where you would get these bonkers casts, probably working for scale just because they wanted to be a part of it. He had a sense of a rep theater. There were a lot of people who appeared in a lot of Woody Allen movies, and he had producers who knew exactly how to make a Woody Allen movie work financially. And there's a guy who
and increasingly around the world, too.
Yeah. And there's a guy who works for Wes, I think his name's Jeremy Dawson, who is just like apparently the magician here, where it's like he rents out the German hotel that everybody stays at. And it's like old school producing deal making of like, this is how we're going to make this work. So that's always kind of like the behind the scenes stuff of his movies is really interesting. All the stuff about like Asteroid City, people living in Spain and just being like, I never want this to end. This is so much fun.
Yeah, it's also an interesting movie in that it came out fairly early in the year and had a kind of momentum in terms of like its box office was longer, its international box office was very long.
It's also a sign that they didn't, I mean, he's worked with, I guess he's made films with Searchlight and Focus and bopped around in that sense, but like, they released it in March because this was not an Oscar movie.
Yeah.
Right? There was no, in all of their internal thinking about this, I mean, they brought it to festivals. I think they premiered it in Berlin. They had a plan to recoup. They did not have a plan to stretch it for an entire year through award season and make this kind of money, which was interesting.
It's really cool.
It was a total surprise to the degree that I feel like, John, you pay attention to this stuff all the time. There aren't that many surprises like that, are there, in terms of like
this was
overperforming beyond
so you
anyone's
weren't doing
expectation?
Big Pick yet, right?
No, I wasn't. I mean, it's one of the first things I said when we started talking. Like, it's hard to explain just how this movie got this big. I think there are also some other contributing factors. I think for a generation of young moviegoers, this is like an introduction to Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
I think there is a kind of millennial pink aesthetic that this movie has that honestly is influential.
The color palette is very inviting.
It's very beautiful.
It's very different.
It feels very of a time. It's also very much, we're in term 2 of Obama, like emotionally, like these kinds of movies tended to have a little bit more success. I think there's something about him doing something that feels so much like him, but so outside of the expectations of what it is that he does. That for whatever reason resonated very, very hard. And maybe even some of those kids, like your kids, saw Fantastic Mr. Fox as 9-year-olds, and all of a sudden they're, 16. and they're like, I want to go to the movies.
Yeah.
Do you get the sense, though, and this might be the last Woody Allen comparison we make, I'm not sure. We have a lot of open road ahead of us.
Strike two.
But I do get the sense that one thing that they have in common as filmmakers is like, well, I'm making the next one. And
yes.
I
He's
don't
already on to his next one.
I don't think that
Asteroid.
he was, in the edit bay or, doing the final scoring with Alexandra being like, I've done it.
No. I mean,
I've
Norton
made my
Moonlight
masterpiece.
and said that I think either at the end of Moonlight or right as they were doing press for Moonlight Kingdom, Wes was like, here's the script for Grand Budapest Hotel.
Yeah, I saw The French Dispatch at Telluride in 21, and he didn't even come because he was like, I'm doing Asteroid City.
Yeah.
Like he's on to the next one,
I
which
don't
is
wanna
cool.
belabor this personally, but it was nominated for 9 Oscars, including picture, screenplay, cinematography, and director. It won 4. Best costume design, best makeup, best production design, and best original score for your guy, Alex. I just want to say this was the best actor this year. It's a 2000.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking.
It's
that he
the
didn't get
87th
that.
Oscars. Eddie Redmayne won for Theory of Everything.
One of the single worst wins in Oscar history.
A movie that people still don't talk about to this day.
Steve Carell was nominated for Foxcatcher. Bradley Cooper as Chris Kyle in American Sniper.
I think that's a good performance.
Me too. Benedict Cumberbatch in Imitation Game. I didn't care for this film. Michael Keaton in Birdman. I dare say that I think Ralph Fiennes could have found some daylight in that category.
It's extremely disappointing.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time to be doing this too, because he's about to star in this movie Conclave.
Yeah.
About the selection of the next pope.
That trailer
He's
is sick.
the star of
And
that.
he's the star, and there's some speculation that it's time for
It's
Ralph
Ralph time.
Fiennes.
Well, didn't
Yeah.
he win for Schindler's List?
I don't believe he did.
No. I think he maybe got
He
nominated.
did get
though.
nominated.
No Roger Ebert for this one, so I will go with our guy Richard Brody from The New Yorker.
Well, he's in the tank,
Wow.
but let's
He
go.
loved this movie. I will say there's plenty of really interesting writing about why this movie sucks. David Thompson from The New Republic wrote an absolutely scathing
Is that a
takedown.
fact?
Yeah.
By the way, Rafe did not win an Oscar. You guys are
did
both
not,
right,
yeah.
and I'm wrong.
Yeah. Richard Brody said the story of the lost grandeur of a hotel that is restored and perpetuated by way of a book is also the story of a tradition of personal nobility, a severe and self-imposed code of conduct that proves in the face of historically terrifying and catastrophic trouble to be a rock of steadfast decency. That tradition in turn is preserved and perpetuated in art. The Grand Budapest Hotel is the closest thing to a credo, a discourse of principle that Anderson has yet offered.
Interesting.
So it won Best Credo.
One
that year.
credo.
I had one other read on it before we get into maybe categories and less high-minded stuff. But I didn't, in reading reviews of it and looking at what people have to say about the movie, there's not as much of a reading about it being a story about class. And it feels very much like a story about class to me, in part because it's obviously Tony Revolori's character is a refugee.
Yeah.
And also Ralph Fiennes is in the service industry. He's a person of extraordinary taste and manners, but he's not a rich man.
No.
He's trying to get money. He's spending all of this time with these elder women with great power.
Well, I think further down that path is actually the conversation about what Wes Anderson includes and what he kind of elides. And I think Zero as very much an immigrant, a refugee from what is essentially an other to the Europe that he is now living in. You can definitely read Gustav as queer in some ways. I think there's been a lot of writing about that. As he says, I sleep with all of my friends. Maybe he's just friendly. And then also something else that is, relatively missing from the text, but is very much there in the subtext is Judaism, because Stefan Zweig was Jewish. World War II, not great for Jews generally. And Kovacs, the Jeff Goldblum character, is suffers also a bad end. So I think that all of those things, to my reading of it and watching it a few times, I actually think that the way he handles those things is not just in keeping with his personal sort of style, but I think kind of beautiful. Because he's painting it all with the same dreamy brush, but then some of those dreams are actually nightmares if you watch the movie again and again. But I think there's a conversation to be had.
Yeah, I mean,
feels very intentional. Everything you just described.
I think his representation also in the world where the people who are working like hard working class jobs, Agatha, Gustav, Zero,
the prison guards,
they're dressed in these pastels, and they have color, and they have a vivaciousness to them and then everybody who's like sort of rich and fascist is wearing black,
Dark.
and they're shot from a distance, and they're evil, and like there is
call.
definitely like he definitely like brings you so close to those people who are working real jobs.
This is an interesting thing though about Wes Anderson to me, because I wasn't being critical, but just noting that like he now is just like in a herringbone tweed jacket somewhere, smoking a pipe and reading an ancient novel. But and God bless him, I love him.
What if he's just like
he's watching Beekeeper?
yeah? What if seriously?
He could be.
We contain multitudes.
Mountain
He's
Dew.
just like he is just like a dorky guy from Texas. I mean, he is just like a regular guy who is also a mega genius at filmmaking.
Yeah,
and so there's this constant tension in all of his movies about class. And this one feels so elevated because it is about the people who literally are in service of the higher class.
But also there's an important point that the movie makes, that there's a difference between class and wealth and taste. When Gustav takes Boy with Apple, he says everything else here is bullshit.
Yeah, and there's like an Egon Schiele like right behind it. Yeah,
although we can get into that, but that's actually a fake Egon Schiele that is called that they had designed.
You see that?
Look at the big brain on Brett.
Did you guys do this research? Do you know what that fake painting was called?
His sword.
I know what the fake painting on the wall is called. We're gonna get to that.
Okay, we'll save it, but it's pretty good.
The recuratables.
But yeah, that the people who are the heroes of this movie are competent and creative and aesthetic and curious and interesting, and the other people are not. Now, the counter to that is how much time on set did Wes spend graphic designing and doodling the perfect SS logo?
Sounds like a lot.
But
ZZ, for the record.
You could also make the point that all cults have a certain look and style to make people want to sign up.
It's true.
So,
all right, guys. A movie of chapters and also of lots of scenes that kind of bleed into one another and you know move from location to location.
From aspect ratio to aspect ratio.
From aspect ratio. I have the following scenes.
Okay.
Gustav and the Dowager Countess greeting her. I have this because if you're watching this movie first time, or if you are following like some criticism of the film as being uptight, stuffy, Wes Anderson herringbone bullshit, the moment...
I didn't say bullshit,
I know.
didn't you?
The moment that Gustav says, "to fucking Lutz," is like when you're like, oh, this is going to be actually like a profane movie where this guy has human reactions at the ends of these soliloquies.
I had the same reaction, but just 2 lines later, when he says, "this diabolical varnish," when he's looking at her nail polish, which is really funny. And
well, he breaks too, because she's being very, very earnest.
Yeah.
Saying, I may not live again, and he's just disgusted.
Sorry, did you? Yeah.
That moment, that sequence is among my favorites in the whole movie. And you're right; it shows you that Gustav is not just this effete concierge.
He's actually like an East London dude. Yeah, there's a little bit of in Bruges in this one. Gustav shows Zero the ropes, junior lobby boy in training. This is a great scene. You get so many little details of the hotel. I especially love the walk Gustav does as he's coming in and people are bringing him things to approve. And he's like, no, yes. This is so good. I also like the description of her exit as shaking like a shitting dog.
You just like the swears.
Yeah.
I'm noticing that. You're a simple guy.
I can only be me. This is obviously after the passing of Madame D, played amazingly by Tilda Swinton in old age makeup. Gustav and Lutz, the train ride, you meet Edward Norton's Henkel's characters.
Little Albert.
And this is where you get your hand off my lobby boy that I mentioned at the beginning of the pod. The reading of the will by Kovac. I put all of this Lutz stuff in one scene, even though it's 3 or 4 scenes. The reading of the will by Kovac and meeting Dmitri, Marguerite, Letizia, and Carolina. This is where the Van Hoytel gets given to Gustav tax-free.
Van Hoytel the younger, I believe.
Yeah, the young, Boy with Apple. And we first meet Adrien Brody's character Dmitri with one of the all-time first lines. Really cinches the eyebrows.
Yeah.
You want to take it, Chris?
I think I'll skip announcing it, and I recommend Craig not put it in, but it's pretty funny in the context.
Reminds me of a Woody Allen film. You know?
Sir Angry! You're out. Get off the pod. Next scene I had is Gustav in jail, serving mush and meeting Pinky and Ludwig's gang.
He's become a dear friend.
Yeah. I think the meeting between Zero and Gustav in particular, when he is explaining his circumstances, is another wonderful twist on the Gustav character, where it's like he's pretty wily. He can make friends anywhere.
Yeah, and he's at Zero asks him to swear on the Bible. He's like, I'll do that later.
Also, that entire prison scene invented Paddington 2, for which I'm very grateful.
Great call.
Haven't seen that one. It's
about a bear.
The not agreed scene.
Not agreed.
Not agreed.
The Kovacs scene. Yeah.
With Dimitri, and then that leads to the great chase sequence of Joplin following Kovacs through the trams,
the Kunstmuseum,
into the Kunstmuseum. We also get Joplin killing Kovac's cat. And it's just that
launching him,
and what maybe the best line in the movie, which is, "Did he just throw my cat out the window?"
And all the sisters are like, "No, I don't.
No.
Did he?
This, for what it's worth, is basically lifted in the chase scene between Joplin and Kovac is pretty much entirely lifted from Torn Curtain, the Albert Hitchcock movie. There's a great YouTube video on the Mubi YouTube channel where they break down like. This
side by side.
Yeah. I guess, would you consider this an homage or a Jack move?
It depends on who you ask.
He's asking you.
I think it's...
Look at that dodge.
Cinema Sheriff Sean Fennessey.
There are a tremendous number of homage paid to various movies, like really high-minded stuff, like Frank Borzage movies, and then also just like A Shot in the Dark with Peter Sellers. You know what I mean? Like there's this he has a fluid relationship with movie history, much like all of the filmmakers that I'm obsessed with. And so I love that. And I love that he constantly is just like,
it's fitting that
over here, watch this movie.
Shortly after Pulp Fiction. Just because those two movies both like have sometimes like full shots or full sequences that are taken from other films.
I also think, Sean, you referenced it, but I do think Hitchcock is very intentional and important because of a person who had two careers, one before the war and one after the war.
Yes. But his movies in the 30s are feel very, very important to this film.
In terms of like the creeping dread on the horizon kind of stuff.
And also just, there are many of those movies that are set in hotels and they're set at wintertime. And, there's a lot of curiosity about like, will the right man win or will the wrong man escape?
And question of scale, right? Can we tell the story of contemporary humanity on a train? Right. Can we tell it in a locked room, essentially?
Yeah, I feel like The Lady Vanishes is probably the number one big influence on this movie.
The Prison Break. Quite a sequence. What an amazing piece of design too. Like, there's a bunch of really cool stories about building camera rigs that go in reverse and then run the film backwards so that they can show them descending things or going up things.
I just love that little image. Maybe this is cutting into Great Shot Gordo of just the ladder coming down into the frame. When they're getting ready to prepare.
This is very fantastic, Mr. Fox.
Yes.
The sequence.
Yeah, and as is the Society of Cross Keys sequence, which is very fun, just for the cameos from Bill Murray and Fisher Stevens. It's
the Bob Balaban erasure is not going to fly with me.
I'm not trying to erase anybody.
Okay.
Walrus,
Walrus is in it. Then we get into the Alpine Chase.
Thank you.
Which I think might be the Clubhouse favorite.
Is it? Well, we didn't pregame.
I thought you were saying thank you. I thought you
the cable cars exchange,
the
and then down
the monks, and then the skiing bobsledding.
Well, it's not just that.
As a winter sports enthusiast,
it's That's why it's the greatest movie to me.
That leads into the Grand Budapest shootout, and then I'm going to call this a scene, which is the narrative re-nesting, which is like the multiple pullbacks. You learn about the fate of Gustav and Agatha. You learn that Gustav traded his fortune to this new, like, sort of post-Soviet or Soviet bloc state to keep the Grand Budapest.
Right.
And he did it because this is where he and Agatha were happy for a time. Then we see Jude Law writing.
That's what you guys did at Sunset Gower, right? That's where you guys
very
are happiest.
Similar. Yeah. Speaking of decrepit,
we see Jude Law writing. We see Tom Wilkinson writing. We see the teenager finishing the book.
I haven't been on as many rewatchables as you guys, but that is essentially the entire movie. You've listed like the 8 set pieces, which I love.
Yeah, it was hard for me to be like, this is the... We usually try to be like, here's the champions, here are the final 4, 5, 6, but like, I think this was hard because so many of this was like, like there are little sequences where now all of a sudden you've moved.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the movie in a series of like little sequences for this category. So like that first conversation between Zero and Gustav after Madame de takes off in the car is a conversation I love, where he's like who hired a lobby boy, and then Mr. Moser comes down and
the window opening and the cripple shoeshine boy.
Yeah. Like that whole sequence, the explanation of the prison break by Harvey Keitel's character, which is like the return of Winston Wolfe, is like 4 minutes in the middle of the movie that I just love, where he like unfurls the map. And
you have a lovely line.
Yeah. it's very funny. It's very beautiful. It's a great little Keitel performance. He's like shirtless, tattooed.
Yeah, and he's basically doing Mr. Pink's or Mr. White's dialogue.
Yeah. It's great. So it's a little hard because I think that the Alpine Chase is like a great example of what makes Wes Anderson very unique and special, and his filmmaking virtuosity. But I like the little smaller stuff where they laugh the most.
Yeah,
personally.
I think that I think if I have to pick one, it's lobby boy training and that whole sequence of introducing Zero to the world. What about you?
I mean, I think that truly this movie is kind of a closed loop. Like everything leads to everything else. It's very hard to take anything out because there's no outliers. It all fits. I still pick the Alpine Chase just because I think if you were to sort of surgically remove one portion of the movie, everything that we've been talking about for 40 minutes is in that section, from the filmmaking bravura and the very specific aesthetic choices of the miniatures to the increasing satirical lunacy of asking the same question 5 times and him saying, until him getting mad, leading to
I'm innocent.
Confess, leading to the scene in the confessional with Matthew Almeric, which is hilarious and incensed. And then I was reading about how they shot those separately, and then Ralph Fiennes had to do it again after he saw the intensity that our guy, our number one French boy from the Bureau, brought in that scene. I would just carve it out. It just makes me laugh every time.
All right, so we have a couple of different ones.
I'll go with the Alpine Chase just to make the decision.
So the Alpine Chase is the most rewatchable scene, but we have some other contenders in there. What's Age of the Best? Fennessey, you got anything for me?
Confirmation of Wes Anderson as a historical filmmaker, I think, is the number one thing. I think this is you had a big fat hit. It was a Oscar darling that features the best performance of one of the best actors of the last 50 years. And this is I wonder if this is the first movie mentioned in his obituary. It's very possible.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. I wonder, that's a really good category. Is this his obit movie?
What's your guys' obit podcast?
Copland.
You just knew.
It's probably
what about the time you got
Crime?
Incredibly mad that I took Avengers Endgame in a draft and you started crying?
Every draft where I acted like an asshole, that's my legacy as a creative person in the world.
Sean Fennessey, husband, father, thought leader, and whiny little crybaby.
Yeah,
on the mic,
made podcast host
because you couldn't pick Thanos.
I think we're going to keep talking about this in probably most of the categories, but Ralph Fiennes' performance.
Yeah.
To your point, Sean, about how you kind of don't always know what a director's apex mountain is, or a not just a career-changing film, but a reputation reorienting film would be. Ralph Fiennes has been consistently brilliant in movies since his first movie, which was Schindler's List, and brilliant in a way that almost feels effortless, and also brilliant in a way that he's rarely the star of the movie. He's almost always the best or one of the best things in it, and he can do almost anything, but you rarely see the conversation shift to considering him with each new Ralph Fiennes movie, right? And so then to see this in retrospect, not just in terms of this performance, but in terms of all the other wildly incredible things that he's done in the years since, I think Hail Caesar was after this, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I was going to say that. It's so interesting that he would take a tiny part like that immediately after being at the center of a massive hit.
There's a degree to which I think when he first starts out and he's in The English Patient, he's always been a little bit of a character actor. I mean, he's plays in the remake of Manhunter that Ridley Scott, he's in Red Dragon, right? He's
Voldemort.
Yeah, he's Voldemort. He's willing to be the bad guy. He's willing to be the seventh person on the call sheet, maybe.
But he's also M in the James Bond movies, where he's decent and honorable. He just has so many things in his toolbox that to see him just he just runs laps around this movie to such a degree, and it only works because of how funny it is, but it also only works because of how melancholy he is underneath the funny. And I just think it's only gotten better.
It's interesting. This is right smack in the middle of a 10-year window for him that is amazing, though. If you look at from roughly, if you want to say like In Bruges, and it's also right around when he starts doing Voldemort, and in that period of time, he's in The Hurt Locker. He's in 3 more Harry Potter movies.
Mm-hmm.
He's Coriolanus in a Coriolanus adaptation that's very good. He's in Skyfall, of course. Grand Budapest Hotel. The next year, he's in A Bigger Splash, one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
And then in Hail Caesar. And, since then, it's a little more wandering in the dark. But
he's also throughout that entire time does like a play a year.
Yes. And one of the great Shakespearean actors of his time. And but this is an extended heater for a 50-year-old British guy. It's a very unusual kind of stardom that you don't see as much these days.
I saw him do this thing that's on YouTube. It's a David Hare play that's just about like basically a stand-in for David Hare. It's a monologue about him getting, I think, long COVID. And he's just like talking about it for 40 minutes. And then the BBC wouldn't run it for a variety of reasons. But like, it's just on YouTube. It's insane how good Ray Fiennes is just like by himself in a room full of books talking about having COVID. And it's nuts. It's so good.
I had forgotten he's also going to be in 28 Years Later, the 28 Days Later follow-up. Yeah. He's amazing.
More Age the Best. I can't quite find the German phrase for this or like the fun way of describing how much every single person in this movie squeezes the most out of whatever screen time they have.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have multiple Dion Waiters awards later. Like I added a new one, but there's something about like, how good is Tom Wilkinson? Is he on the screen for more than 2.5 minutes?
I might push back on that later.
Really?
Wow. Interesting take.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm not saying he's not good, but when you're looking at a movie that is essentially flawless, like where could you tweak?
Oh.
I start with the author.
Okay. But to get back to what's Age the Best, I also find the fact that Gustav is actually pretty unscrupulous and flip-flops a lot and will be like, I shall never cross this hotel again, the door of this hotel again. And he's like, actually, we need to go in right now. Or like, I'll never part with Boy with Apple. And then he's like, actually, let's sell it and spend it on whores and whiskey.
He says the reason being, I think this could be a tricky war.
Yeah.
Not too much in the kitty. Genius.
The time when they meet Henkel's on the train and Gustav is like, and how's your mother? That's really good, man.
That aged well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's the best. Yeah.
Did banging heiresses age well?
Is that, wait, as a professional strategy or just as a calling?
Just throwing it out to the room.
Yeah. I mean, what's the downside, Sean? Pitch us the counter to sleeping with rich old ladies.
Yeah.
What's the problem?
It's
not all fillets anymore.
The cheaper cuts, man.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I have no comment.
Okay.
All right.
What else is Age of the Best? Adrien Brody cursing.
Sure.
One of the best to do it.
Really?
Holy fuck! What's the meaning of this shit?
Every other actor in this movie is affecting some sort of transcontinental accent of some kind, and he's just like Adrien Brody in New York. I guess
actually think
too.
the best part about this movie is how many people are just like, I'm just going to do Owen Wilson if that's cool.
Okay.
Or I'm just going to do Jason Schwartzman in 2014 being like, shit.
No, I think that, again, these are the aesthetic choices that might get overlooked, but like that was a decision, right? Because they looked at what was happening, and Ray Fiennes was using this voice, and Tony Revolori was using his own voice from like Orange County. Yeah. And then Saoirse Ronan has talked about it.
He let me do the Irish accent.
Yeah. She would have done any accent, and they were like, well, why don't you just do your own? And she said this is the first movie she's had ever done her native accent in when she was playing a baker in Zubrowka.
I guess that is the thing that setting your film in a fictional country allows for. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is funny because it's
if
something
everybody does it, I think it works. Mm-hmm. If 5 people were trying to do like Eastern European.
Well, as you guys have talked about many times on The Watch, it didn't work out so well in Sokovia. Like that's not just because you have an imagined land with a lot of mythology. It doesn't mean
You're
it's
kind
going
of
to
the
work out
Stefan
well.
Zweig of Sokovia, aren't you?
I'm stateless, sadly, because of what happened with my home
Iron
country
Man
getting
dropped
lifted
it.
up into the sky, a sentient robot. No, it didn't work well with the regime, the HBO show recently, where a Eastern European nation just spoke the Queen's English. But I do think that works, again, everything is heightened, everything is fictional, and the idea of borders being porous and constantly being redefined by forces that are outside of your own control makes sense. I mean, again, not to go back to Zweig, but that's why you guys brought me here, right? He talks multiple times in his writing about what it was like to go from war-torn or pre-war Austria and then be in Paris. I mean, like, everyone was in Paris for one reason, and that was because they liked art and drinking and sex. And so everyone had that in common, even if they didn't speak the same language.
I see you, brother.
That's how we feel about Glendale.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think that this movie would have been better if Ultron had played Gustav?
Wow. Well,
Spader as Gustav is an intriguing
Casting
switch
what if,
up.
or just like a speculative.
but Spader as a robot or
No.
Spader?
No, I don't think Ultron would quite fit in this milieu.
Maybe you should dream a little bigger.
Yeah, dream bigger.
Craig Ultron?
What else is Age the
Would have
Best?
made $500 million more dollars.
Seriously, if Grand Budapest
Good
made
point,
$1
Craig.
billion because it was Welcome to the Grand Ultron Hotel.
Or what if Zubrowka is taken over by Sokovia?
Yeah.
Like, what if it is in the same fictional
Yes,
Europe?
it's not
Then-
too late.
Yeah, then we could get Quicksilver back, and that's all I want. That's all I need.
Which one,
And
though?
that's Scarlet Witch.
Evan Peters or Aaron Taylor Johnson?
Well, canon is Aaron Taylor Johnson in the MCU, right?
Oh, Mr. Deadpool over here talking about canon in the MCU. Okay.
Senior citizen Tilda Swinton, Age the Best. I thought she did a great job with that.
Because she was aged?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, they've talked about, Wes Anderson talked about how they always try to do everything incredibly cheaply except for her old age
they
makeup.
like got her the best.
Very best.
Yeah, they got her like the dinosaur guy from Jurassic
No,
Park.
they got her the guy who did Steve Rogers at the end of Endgame. Sean, just wanted to put it in your terms.
Thank you. Now I understand it. Appreciate that.
fact that this is Tony Revolori's first feature film at bat, pretty much.
Pretty funny.
Not bad.
I think his not being good at acting really helps this movie. I don't mean that to sound rude. It is rude sounding, but like the kind of like amateur quality that he brings to it is appropriate for a person who is effectively an amateur throughout the film. Like Wes has talked about that. He was basically like he's untrained.
His ability to work with younger people, though, I think is I can't remember which person from the cast was like, I think it was Ed Norton, but he was like, younger people are basically like acting computers. Like they don't know the emotions that they're portraying yet, maybe. And Wes is able to be like, just say it exactly like this and stand exactly there and say it like when he walks in.
I think sincerely, there's a bell curve of who can work with Wes Anderson. And on one end is completely untrained young amateurs. And on the other end are the best actors in the world. And in the middle are people who are probably very good, but in order to get there, need to use their own method, their own process, need to improvise, need to find it, need to alt every other line. It takes a certain level of professionalism, as you guys were saying at the beginning, for Ralph Fiennes or Jeff Goldblum to be like, I find myself in this structure and I can bring it.
It's such a good point that I'd never really thought about before. Because if you think about the best performances in his movies, which you were indicating with Fiennes, the big stars of his movies are almost always not just very good actors, but actors who have ironclad screen personas.
Like Luke Wilson.
Except for Luke Wilson. He is the one exception.
Like Andrew Wilson. No?
But like, Bill Murray and Tilda Swinton and Gene Hackman
Willem Dafoe.
and Willem Dafoe
Brody.
and Jeff Goldblum and Adrien Brody and actors who, Frances McDormand in Moonrise Kingdom, Bruce Willis, like these are people who their iconography is as important as their acting skill. And with kids, it's the total opposite. It's a great observation.
Thanks, Sean.
Nice job.
I'll ease up on the MCU stuff.
A couple other quick ones for What's Age the Best. I like everybody doing their own accent, personally. I like the idea of small, frequent meals for stamina.
Oh,
that is a
CR
really
special.
important... That's a great get by
I'm
you.
starting to get more into like maybe food should just be fuel. Like I'm getting a little...
Okay, Ben Solak.
I think it's a little late in the summer. So I'm like dying a little bit, but like I haven't really been like loving let's have a meal, you know?
I have one potato chip at 9 a.m. every morning, and then I wait, and then I have a steak dinner at 7:45.
You sound like every football
I go to bed.
podcaster I've ever listened to.
But you actually have like 4 bites of macaroni and cheese on a waffle, and then you cry, and then you watch 5 movies.
It's pretty much true. Yeah.
Are you saying this? Isn't Craig one of your wellness coaches? Like,
He is.
I don't love you saying you're not loving having meals.
No, what I mean is like I'm not thinking about meals as decadent, like culinary experiences. I'm like, let's power up,
Macros.
let's get back.
But decadent. Let's get to make it's summer. Make a beautiful BLT sandwich.
Make some space for the Mendel's pastries.
I'll tell you.
For
You
Christ's
want to
sake.
know what I do? I mean, you do know this.
Yeah.
Protein plate from Sweet Green. Get the salmon, and then I make a taco.
Craig, like the hype man
Look
over
at my
here.
fucking guy right here. Locked in. Obi-Wan.
All
Young
right.
Obi-Wan.
Where's your soul? Where's your poetry? You're in the ZZ.
That's it. Oh, I mean, yeah, that's it pretty much.
I think the palette too is the other thing, that the colors of this movie were very influential on a certain kind of like a graphic design, a certain kind of menswear and women's wear design too, and like there's an aesthetic that emerged into the culture that aged very well.
Influence. All guys love dressing like concierges now. That's a really good segue, though, into Great Shot Gordo. Shout out to Robert Yeoman, who's shot all of Wes Anderson's live action films,
I believe so.
And they continue to shoot on film, I believe. My Great Shot Gordo, kind of like the letterbox king for this one, is the close-up of Saoirse Ronan with the carousel lights in the background.
That's on
I'm
my
just
list.
a basic guy, I guess. But like, what did you have a different one?
It's a little hard to top that one. I think you got it.
I got a couple.
Damn.
By
All
the
right.
way, I also want to say Robert Yeoman, incredible cinematographer, incredible career, toggling between Wes Anderson's like pointillist, obsessive masterpieces and the comedies of Paul Feig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He shot Spy, right?
Is that like one for them, one for like? I'm not saying those aren't cool hangs and he doesn't do good work on them, but I feel like the experience might be slightly different.
I think he's a guy who is hired to bring a veneer of sophistication to films that
That's literally
are
why
maybe
I'm here,
lacking
by the
that
way.
in the script. It's true. So you are the yeoman of this professional podcast.
I do think it's tough to pick one great shot when you have a movie that this movie has so many great shots that there are, as I Googled, multiple blog posts devoted to the many great shots of this movie. I think the Carnival Lights is definitely one of them. I think Zero and Agatha in the truck with the pink Mendel's boxes everywhere is one of them. But in terms of like impact, of like punch in the gut gasp, the one where after you learn that Gustav has been shot and it cuts to the very stagey, very theatrical framed ghostly shot of the entire staff of the hotel in their finery and in their best, and that is the hammer drop on the emotional impact.
I also
of the
really
movie.
like when they get back to F. Murray Abraham and Jude Law sitting at the table.
Yeah.
And then it pulls back
the
and it's like
ghostly
you
dining
become
hall.
aware that you're like almost watching a play because like the spotlight just is the only light
and
on them.
And the hotel is dead. The hotel is a cemetery.
I think there's probably north of 100 shots of portraiture in the movie too, which is interesting because it's about a movie about the pursuit of a portrait.
Yeah.
And that's obviously the into-camera shot, something that he does very well. But there's a couple in this one that are in the elevator that are amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Where like each character is kind of like positioned at
I
different
honestly
heights.
can't even imagine how they do this. Like we do these pods on video now, and like
Wait, we do?
each time like Gao and
You look
Jack
great.
are amazing what they're doing. Like, can you do this to the left footage, and can you move your computer? And by the way, your computer. And I'm like, I can't work like this. And you imagine being Ray Fiennes and being like, you don't have a centimeter to move, but you're Ray Fiennes.
Sean, you were referring earlier to, you were talking about one of the whip pans, like where the camera reaches the destination before the actor does. And I think you were talking about when Adrien Brody is running specifically. And to be able to do that and to be as funny and charming and in character and make it seem delightful when when he's yelling stop or whatever, but the camera's doing half the work.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Den of Thieves, Benihana Award for the scene stealing location. I'm gonna go a little bit of a zag. The brutalism of the 1960s version of the Grand Budapest. Because I kind of also have like a hankering. It would be kind of rad to stay in a hotel where there's only like 6 other people.
In Soviet Russia?
Yeah, 1960s.
This sounds like the start of one of the movies that you guys see that I won't see.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Startup 2, starring Chris Ryan.
There's like a old ghost in the bathtub.
It's like Andrew Tate called you and invited you to his favorite hotel.
That's not what those movies
Is that,
are.
Would you
is
be
that
like-
strike one?
Would you
Should we
be the
start over?
shot caller of the Grand Budapest Hotel?
Oh, if it was like a prison?
Yeah, well, would you make it that kind of environment?
No, I think I would be like a little bit somewhere between Nikolai Coster-Waldau and shot caller and Fiennes in Grand Budapest. I'm like right in the middle. That's my Venn diagram.
I see.
I would be more the guy who's getting hosed down in the Arabian baths. I hear it's good for me.
Did you guys have a different location?
Well, I think that the completely constructed Alpine cable
Yeah.
cars are really cool, as is the funicular that runs
Mhm.
up into the hotel. I think is very cool. I love a funicular. You guys do much funicular riding?
I like a funicular.
No.
I took a funicular in Bergen, Norway.
we took the
that was dope.
Chris took the funicular first and was kind of meh on the funicular.
Okay.
I enjoyed the funicular, but maybe he had lowered my expectations. Also, you know who? That's because you took it one day, and then the second day I was in line to get on the funicular, and our beloved Tony Gilroy got off the funicular and was like, "It's good, it's great."
Well,
Tony Gilroy likes this funicular
Have you used the Angel's Flight?
I've never done
constantly.
it. It's
yes,
like one of those
Constantly.
like LA
it's a
things.
big hit with the kids.
Really?
Yeah, you go to Grand Central Market, you hop on the Angel's Flight, a local funicular, if you will.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
But Angel's
Oh,
Flight
it's
was
fun.
Where does it go?
inoperable for many years, and they restored it.
But to like Echo Park?
Nope. It goes up to kind of where like Mocha is in the
Oh.
museums,
Just the other side of downtown.
Like Walt
Mhm.
Disney Hall?
and then you go back down.
Are they going to build
I'm
that
going to do that
Dodgers
this
funicular?
weekend.
Well, if you look at the billboards in my neighborhood, they are against it. I have two other here. I mean, you mentioned the hotel. I just feel like it's worth noting that the hotel was a department store
Mhm.
called the Görlitzer Warenhaus that they took over and built two different facades
Yeah.
for, right, for the different eras. But also I know Chris loves this place, the Zwinger Museum in Dresden, which is the double of the Kunstmuseum for the big chase scene.
Sierra spent a lot of time in Dresden.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I actually have spent a night in Dresden.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Um,
One wonderful night with
Mhm.
Madame de.
The Cuddy Pursuit of Happiness Award for Best Needle Drop. I hope, shout out to these guys. I hope I don't butcher the name. Ose Schupels S. Roth Zauril, which is the yodeling in the beginning.
I don't think you got that right.
And they're like a Swiss folk group.
I thought he got it right.
Okay.
I think could we do the reverse of this award, which would be like
The worst music?
No. Like the Wes Anderson deserves praise for like not putting a Kink song in this movie or a Ramones song. You know, like I feel like the urge to go super anachronistic.
Yes. To go Tenenbaums.
Probably would have been strong, and he didn't, and it's aesthetically
Yeah.
perfect. Can you call out something from the score as a needle drop, or no? That's technically
This
not
is,
accurate.
this is like a score. I think this was written for the film.
The
So yeah.
score is incredible.
But
I
there
would-
is also a lot of classical
there is some classical
gems
music.
in this as well.
I think Desplat Canto at Gabelmeister's Peak during which we all agreed was the most rewatchable
Yeah.
scene.
No, I was the
think
holdout.
Really, well, we'll fix that in
Young
post.
Ultron over here.
Did you guys see the Sokovia Stinger at the end of this movie this time around? Did you watch the Criterion Blu-ray edition?
Mhm.
It's pretty sick. Red Hulk appeared.
The Big
Pink Hulk,
Kahuna
excuse
Burger
me.
Award for Best Use of Food and Drink. There's so much great
I
food
want
and drink.
Pink Hulk to get its moment.
I
Sorry.
know, yeah,
Go
Wes
on.
Anderson's Pink Hulk.
Concierge Hulk. That would have been Society Across
It's
Seas. and then-
Monsieur Banner.
Yeah, Hulk picks up last. He's like, I'm in Thailand. I can't be safe. Big Kahuna Burger.
Mm.
I'll give you two
Yep.
options, or
Okay.
you can pick a third.
Oh, it's so hard. I mean, easy. for
Mendel's
me.
cake.
The Mendel's
Yeah.
cake, the pastry that is being inspected by the prison guards,
That he's like, it's too beautiful to
and he
destroy.
won't chop. That's my pick.
That's the ones. That's when they make the cookies in the shape of hammers.
Yeah, I also love the one that
Incredible. They got away with that.
Brilliant.
that Ludwig and Pinky's gang split,
Mm.
and they're like still licking up the icing. Although it does eventually lead chopping to them.
Mendel's is the best. As
Otherwise,
Christoph
I
says.
have the two ducks roasted with olives, rabbit, and salad. Even though later
yeah.
on,
Yeah, they say.
off order,
Mhm.
they're eating lamb,
Mhm.
and I don't know that I
But-
could have done that. Lamb, duck, and rabbit, same meal.
That's
that
your sweet green protein plate. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you, Craig.
that reminds us
That's
of our
perfect for a hot day.
our evening at Saddle Peak.
Oh yeah, that was
Lodge.
my bachelor dinner.
Yeah. Have you been to Saddle Peak Lodge?
I haven't.
We had what did we dine on
Emu?
that evening? We had emu.
Ostrich.
Yeah, do we have kangaroo?
We may have. Yeah,
Wow.
gamey meats.
Bison?
Yeah, a lot of chew.
Did any like little bits of buckshot in the
No.
sirloins?
They
No?
were They were naturally decomposing, and they were discovered in Malibu.
And did Zach hunt them himself? Or
No. I think I would like to have a redo on my bachelor party.
Me too.
What was that really your bachelor party?
I didn't have one. And because it was such a low-key nuptials.
But you had that one night with Madame De in Dresden, so...
I know you won.
Speaking of Chris's bachelor party, we should mention the name of the Mendel's pastry. It's called the courtesan au chocolat. The chocolate courtesan.
Was that also her name? Yeah.
I think it may have been. Wait, so those are your two picks?
Those are my two nominees, yeah.
I think you're missing two important ones.
Me.
The prison mush.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't really want to eat that.
It's quite nutritious with some salt.
Sure.
And it saves their lives because the guy with the scar enjoyed it so much that he murders his cellmate who's going to that's not dry snitching. He's actually that's like wet snitching.
Mush snitching. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think the other one that I found compelling was the champagne that's better than the cat piss that they serve on the train.
I love that.
Good call.
You have to bring your own wine to take the train.
Mallory Rubin Award for did this movie need a better sex scene?
Better than Rafe getting head from an old lady?
That's actually like a really great point.
I don't know how you get better than that. But
Butch's Girlfriend Award. Now, typically here, Bill will highlight the contributions of an actress that he doesn't feel like lives up to the rest of the film.
An actress, you say?
You could talk me into the love story of this film being somewhat thinly developed, somewhat lightly developed. You know, it's just sort of like taken as a given that they fall in love deeply as teens and then survive until the point where Agatha obviously tragically passes. I will say that my nominee for this is probably going to be the Kovacs' sister subplot, which is like
fine.
Oh, no,
the Serge X's sister.
Serge X's sister, sorry. You're right. No disrespect. I can skim through that as like a weak link of the movie.
Yeah, but that gets you the big misdirect of whose head is in the laundry basket.
Because you're worried it's Agatha.
Were you shocked?
No, I wasn't.
You didn't think it was
Agatha?
Agatha?
I didn't think that Wes Anderson was going to behead Agatha.
I think that's a great point about you could see the romance as flimsy. I think that one of the more beautiful lines in the movie, though, is when he basically says, like, we could do whatever we wanted because there was no one looking for us, no one modeling, no one checking for us. We were both completely alone in the world. And that really reminds you that this relationship is essentially Moonrise Kingdom again. Like, it is an impossible young people idealized moment. And it is just a moment in time, but one that consumes the rest of Zero's life.
I don't know that there's a person who's a weak link. I think in general, the Serge X plot line and the usage of Matthew L. Merrick is...
It's also, we get robbed of maybe one or two more Seydoux scenes.
That crossed my mind as I was looking over the cast list.
Seydoux's kind of like, oh, he took it.
Oh yeah, she snitches too.
What's up with
that? A lot
that?
of snitch jackets being caught in the Budapest Hotel.
Well, Clotilde, she's just trying to survive in this harried world.
But she seemed very happy to see Gustav. I feel like, I don't know.
Léa Seydoux is cinema's chief proponent of inflicting pain, which we also learned in Dune Part 2. And
great point.
Forgot about that.
Seated for all representations of
you
that.
have season tickets for getting punished by Léa
Fond of her
Seydoux.
work.
What's age the worst? Working 6.5 days from 5 a.m. to midnight. Probably.
No, that's legal in Arkansas now. Sarah Huckabee
That was
Sanders
actually how we
signed that
made
bill.
Grantland, honestly.
It felt that way.
That was the blogosphere.
Yeah, it did feel that way.
I don't mean any disrespect.
Okay.
I'm just going to say it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think hotel service is as good as it is depicted in this film.
Well, I think the question is, was it that good 100 years ago?
Who knows? Who can say? I mean, it's also, they're not air conditioned, so, that's in the mountains, so you're probably cool up there. But, there's lots of really great advances, and I love a hotel.
What's your opinion on extemporaneous romantic poetry? Like, do you feel like that is an appealing characteristic? Because when Agatha suddenly busts out a couple,
I think one of
couplets,
the funniest parts of this movie is the poetry is terrible.
It is terrible.
It's just terrible poetry.
It's very
every time.
good. Very good. I would say what's aged the worst is the still lingering take that Wes Anderson is just a spectrum-y fancy boy playing dress up all around the world. I feel like that.
You feel like that take's still out there?
Oh, I feel like it was out there when this movie
Is that
came
on
out.
Tim Wall's Twitter? Like, you're like...
It's been scrubbed already. It's been scrubbed already.
Tim Wall said that?
No.
Wow, finally the Republicans have something they can use against him.
It's true.
The ammo they need.
The left in disarray.
Do you guys think that something that's aged the worst is just the profession of concierges?
I'm glad you asked. I was recently at a hotel in Raleigh, North Carolina, a wonderful establishment. And I walked in to the lobby. And of course, typically in a nice hotel lobby, you've got to the left, you've got your concierge, to the right, you've got your check-in, sometimes vice versa. And it occurred to me when I walked into this hotel not 3 days ago that I have never once asked a concierge for anything in my life. Oh. I have never, and I think walk me through this. Is this a class thing or not? Because I think I'm like too ashamed to need the help of someone who feels like they're sort of like...
I just don't know. I legitimately don't know what they would do now that the internet doesn't do.
I would say, and this is, I was going to accuse Sean of humble bragging for saying he was in a hotel recently. I'm going to come off the top rope and say concierges in countries where you don't speak the language.
Very helpful.
Tremendously
incredibly
helpful.
helpful.
That's a very
particularly
good point.
A place like...
That was not an issue in Raleigh, North Carolina.
No.
Yeah. You're in Houston. Do you need a concierge?
That's because you preach a whole platform of just like jobs.
That's right. Absolutely.
Normal things. No, like in places like Tokyo where you can't like go on Open Table, the person at the concierge desk will pick up the phone and call the place for you. And that's very, very helpful.
The concierges in hotels will do that right now. I personally just have no relationship to that experience for whatever maybe my parents
it's
didn't
also like
use
sometimes
them,
I
or
think
I don't
that
know.
like if you're in New York and you try to get the concierge to get you into like Don Angie or something like that, and then they're like, I can't. And I'm like, if I was fucking Paul Mescal, could you? You know what I mean?
I'm gonna.
Are you saying you don't have the same clout as Paul Mescal?
I don't think so.
I'm gonna suggest both have been on the watch, so maybe that's
very good point.
I feel like maybe we democratize.
But so have you.
It really lowers the average. Here's my take: we have democratized concierging too much.
Have you ever used a concierge?
No.
Because wait, here's the thing. If you were at a fine hotel like the Grand Budapest or somewhere in Paris, and you knew that this place was the best of everything, like the best service, the best restaurant, the best champagne in the rooms, you would trust the concierge to actually know the city and give you access to the theater that you couldn't get into otherwise. Every Best Western in Sheboygan has a concierge desk where they're going to hand you the pamphlet about the hot springs that are closed. You know what I mean? Like, we have to find a new language here. That's the issue. Concierge is for the elites.
Well, do you want a guy to Google for you?
That's what I'm saying. It should go back. It shouldn't
you want
be
somebody
Googling.
to basically be like, tell me what the 15 hottest restaurants in this area
and know
are.
how to do things.
You know
like
what I
as
do
the Society of
I'm
Crossed
glad we're
Keys.
talking about this. I like when I stay at a motel and I'm talking to the guy at reception and he breaks out a map and
When's
he
the
starts
last time you
drawing
stayed
in
at a
pencil.
motel?
All the time. How dare you make me seem as though I am not among the common men.
He's describing the penultimate episode of Mad Men. He has not stayed in a motel when Don gets robbed.
Well, I very vividly remember being on the drive along the one in the late 2000s, early 2010s with my wife, and we stayed at a series of hotels all along California. And you'd wake up in the morning, you had never been to whatever Carmel by the Sea, and you go to the front desk and they just break out the map and then they draw you here. Go to this place.
Here's Clint
this
Eastwood's
thing,
house.
over here. Yeah,
Here's how you parasail. Yeah.
The Sonny Bono Memorial Mayors.
That feels over. I mean, you could do that on Yelp, obviously, quite easily. You could do that. You could look at the eater list for Carmel.
You guys, you're not romantic. I feel like this movie shows us that concierges can do other things like CPR.
That's right.
You know?
Yeah, like break out of prison.
I also think this movie is sort of colored by take. I just like all concierges. Are you guys all Grand MILF guys? Like, what's going on?
Good question. Is that really what the sorority of Crossed Keys is about?
It's about guys who love to have sex with old women. What's age the worst? Fascism.
There's a framing where you could say it's doing fine.
And
are we dropping this pod on election day? When
what
is
if
this coming
Bill
out?
Shelved this because he was just like too much Zweig talk.
Herb Greenwald keeps talking about Woody Allen.
Yeah. Scribes Fever. I hate it. It's still around. It's still out there, even for podcasters.
Oh, that's aged well then, right?
I think it's
yeah.
Scribes Fever is like, but it's aged the worst. Like, I wish we could have gotten rid of it. Like, we got rid of concierges, you know?
That's what the author references.
Yeah, he's it's basically I have a depressive writer's block.
Do you know what's aged badly? Is the suggestion in the movie that modern medicine will cure all pandemic type viruses quickly.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Good call.
Because
what is it that they're afflicted
the Prussian
by?
grip.
The Prussian grip.
Yeah, and he's like, today's medicine would have knocked that out in a week. And I guess, yeah.
But what if it's just athlete's foot?
That would be fine. I don't think that would have. I think
that wouldn't
Agatha
have taken her out.
No, I think she's a strong woman.
Okay.
Ruffalo Hannah Rubenak Partridge Overacting Award.
I think this is a tough one. People aren't allowed to overact in a Wes
Well,
Anderson
Willem
movie.
Dafoe overacts in every Wes Anderson movie. I love
But he
Willem
doesn't even
Dafoe.
speak that much.
It's so much mugging.
And
the
I mean,
teeth.
I think he and Brody are really dining out. I fucking love Brody in this movie, but you know,
Dafoe is the closest, but he's being asked to do that.
he is. He is.
was there a better title for this movie?
No.
No.
Fuck no.
The Can You Dig It Award for the most memorable quote. I think "Take Your Hands Off My Lobby Boy," or "You see, there are still flint glimmers of civilization left in this barbaric slaughterhouse that was once known as humanity. Indeed, that's what we provide in our own modest, humble, insignificant." Oh, fuck it.
I think that would be my choice.
I've got a couple more.
Hit me.
Well, we already said I go to bed with all my friends.
Yeah.
We already said the one about the cat. Would you like to say it again?
Did you just throw my cat out the window?
The dialogue of "there's really no point in doing anything in life because it's all over in the blink of an eye," and the next thing you know, rigor mortis sets in, and then a moment later he says she was dynamite in the sack right away. When you're young, it's all fillet steak, but as the years go by, you have to move on to the cheaper cuts, which is fine with me because I like those, more flavorful, or so they say.
Can I give one?
Yeah.
I love when he goes, "Me thinks, me breathes, me laughs, me fears, me." Holy shit, you got him!
Yeah. And then, and also the with Zero, when he asks if Zero knows what to do and have you ever been interrogated? And he says, "I was arrested and tortured by the rebel militia after the desert uprising." Well, you know the drill then. Zip it. Great.
I do like when he approaches the madam's corpse and he's like, "You're looking so well, darling. You really are. They've done a marvelous job. I don't know what sort of cream they've put on you down at the morgue, but I want some."
I want some. Yeah. And then he's like, "Clotilde, get me a glass of chilled water with no ice."
What isn't there a line where he says he's like a real straight guy and he says no one's ever said that about me before?
Yeah.
Great.
The CR thinks Luke Wilson could have been Harrison Ford Hottest Take Award.
Could Luke Wilson have been M. Gustav?
Or M. Chuck, even.
Or M. Chuck.
I have one for you. Do you want to go first? Do you have a hottest take?
I think that you can put Owen Wilson in the lead role of every Wes Anderson movie, and it's actually better except for this movie. This is the only movie where and I have felt this since Tenenbaums, where I'm like,
So who would Owen Wilson have been in Moonrise?
I guess he's kind of sort of Edward Norton in that part.
Okay.
But this is one where you can't have a repertory player from the Wilson company.
Okay. That's a great take. What about you?
For a hot take, are we doing the one about people, are they actually good at their jobs?
Oh, that was the Vincent Chase Award. You can I'm sorry for skipping that. I just assumed there was so much professionalism going on here.
I don't know about the writer. Are we sure the author is good?
Oh, let's go back to so this is actually a great hot take because I had, first of all, I had no idea you would be.
Well,
that is supposed to be Stefan Zweig, essentially.
Yes, I think. Okay, so this is also I'll carve this out of my potential recasting conversation. I think Tom Wilkinson, may rest in peace, phenomenal actor, good in so many good movies of the last of the first two decades of the century. He likes to buy bread. I kind of think. That part could have been better with a different kind of crusty Englishman. John Hurt in that role, a Michael Gambon, a Terrence Stamp, like just kind of a different authorial.
Gambon, no stranger to a
energy.
Wes Anderson's film.
Correct. So, but the second thing is, are we sure that he's a really good writer? Because his whole thing is, I just stumble into stories, then go off on rest cures to South America.
I think that's an interesting question because that gets into whether or not
was he WGA or
he's using.
He wasn't, which is the source of my ire.
Oh yeah, because he's equity.
He was the scab.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
he like is using that as basically a distancing mechanism.
Yeah,
and I wonder whether or not, of course, like in the same way that we talked about with like why does Zero kind of elide the Agatha stuff, even, and it makes him cry just at the very mention of her name, but goes into so much detail about Monsieur Gustave. I think that his being like, you can just sit there and people will come up and tell you stories. It's like, well, he pursued that story, and I think that story probably is supposed to color in a lot of who that person is.
Because of his interest in it, you mean?
Yeah, I think so.
I also might be reacting to the fact that what we see...
Why is he going around to like decaying hotels of the world if he doesn't share some of that same romanticism?
You know what I think kind of affected my viewing of him and my understanding of the character, and I feel like Sean will be with me on this. In the opening, when it's Tom Wilkinson and he's addressing the camera, there's real J.D. Vance energy to the way he treats his grandson. You know, in the sense that, you know, when J.D. Vance got the call, he was like, stop fucking looking at Pokemon cards or whatever to his 8-year-old.
Yeah.
And this kid comes in with a pop gun and he just erupts on him. And I was like, you can dictate your memoirs in a second.
Yeah.
Your kid's here now.
It was very Royal Tenenbaum.
Oh, that's you're just like you feel like he could have been a better dad.
And then the kid comes by
But
and
is
he
that
says
his
sorry.
son?
Grandson, I think.
Grandson.
And the kid
okay.
says sorry and he said sorry. But I don't know if it's true.
that's
don't
how
know
we were raised. And we turned out fine.
Ralph,
Well,
you guys
we're-
are very
we're
well
okay.
adjusted.
Look
You're
what we do for a living.
Very well adjusted.
My
both
hot
of you.
take is that Dimitri got a lot of things wrong. And I don't necessarily associate with his political ideology. I certainly
Necessarily.
don't. I certainly don't.
What about his sexual politics?
I think he was right about Gustav being a con artist.
Huh.
And so there's that line he has where he's like, this criminal has plagued my family for 20 years. He's a ruthless adventurer and a con artist who preys on mentally feeble, sick old ladies, and he probably fucks them too.
It's quite a thing winning the loyalty of a woman like that for 19 consecutive seasons, Chris.
Mhm.
I'm just saying,
Mhm.
if a guy like Gustav showed up in my mom's life, I'd be suspicious. I'd be
Uh-huh.
suspicious.
You wouldn't be happy
if my
for
mom
her?
was like, I love this weird hotel.
Yeah.
The concierge is the best. And he was like, I would just be like, what's up with Gustav? Like, what, like,
Why wouldn't you be happy for her? You know? You live on the other side of the
like,
country.
I want boy with Apple. You know what I mean? Like, that's like, there's like a certain inheritance I expected. You
But
know?
I think, Chris, you are not, first of all, I mean this sincerely. You're my best friend. You are not Dimitri. You know what I mean? Dimitri only wants Boy with Apple because he doesn't want someone else to have it.
Yeah.
He's not the aesthete that you are.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
You are, at least in the first draft of history
Mhm.
in this movie, before things go out of control, there's a world where they give him Boy with Apple and then they move on.
Sure.
Right? Like there's a version of the story where everyone gets what they want. And it's sad.
Yeah,
honestly.
that's
But
like
you know what? That's my take. The movie should have ended at the 17-minute mark. They get Boy with Apple.
It's a phenomenal hot take. You don't relate in any way to Dimitri.
I don't.
mean, there's nothing.
I'm just saying I
there's-
think he might be right. I think, and I also think that if like a dude showed
Okay.
up in your mom's life like that, you'd be like,
So here's the question.
I'm a little sus.
Is when I said that this movie is about class, part of what I mean is that I think one of the ideas of the movie is that it's a good thing for the have-nots to aggressively pursue the haves to
Sexually.
get more to balance
and fuck them.
and fiscally.
It's a Saltburn situation.
Yeah, and that there is a kind of justice in that pursuit. So by you identifying that Dimitri's point of view
I'm
is
not
the correct
identifying with
point of view.
Dimitri's point of view. I think he might have a point that Gustav
Sean.
might have had a little bit of con artist.
Sean, I just
What
feel
if he
like
loved her?
Sean, Chris's ideology is simple. Let me explain it to you. There are makers and there are takers. And Chris just invariably feels like he's one of the former.
Casting what ifs. Angela Lansbury from Adam D is one of the all-time what ifs.
Totally.
Oh, that was supposed to happen?
Yes.
She had to go do
Driving Miss Daisy
On
on
stage.
stage.
there was a scheduling difficulty. Apparently,
my wife's favorite.
Anderson
My wife
like
loves Angela
blocks
Lansbury.
out.
Your wife loves Driving Miss Daisy.
Can you imagine him being like,
No, her
I
favorite
fucked
movie is
Angela
Hillbilly Elegy.
Lansbury?
Sorry, yeah.
There was also a
You said Hillbilly Elegy at the same time you said I fucked Angela Lansbury.
I said,
Can
you
we
imagine
separate the audio tracks for that moment?
It's the remix. There was also a rumor going around that Johnny Depp had been up for Gustav, but Wes Anderson has shot that down.
That feels like a Johnny Depp perpetuated rumor.
The only other casting what if I will say is that Norton was like shown the script, and then Wes Anderson was like, by the way, like basically choose your part or tell me what part you're interested in, except for Gustav, because that's for Ralph Fiennes. And Edward Norton was like, if he had picked anybody else but Ralph Fiennes, I would have been banging down his door to get to play Gustav.
I had a semi-hot take relevant to this question. Norton, we love. We love him. Big Ed, they call him. Did it have to be him as Henkels? Like, I went through the...
That could have been Owen Wilson.
I went through the repertory of Wes movies. Yes, and that could have been an Owen Wilson part. I don't know if it gets better or worse. Interestingly, the three actors that he works with frequently that I like a lot that could have played that part, I think are all disqualified because of their ethnic background and presentation. Because Liev Schreiber has worked with him before, could have played that part. Jeffrey Wright could have played that part. Benicio del Toro could have played that part. but none of them have the appropriately milky complexion of Edward Norton. So maybe that's why it had to be him.
Well, I think Edward Norton has just appeared in every single Wes Anderson movie since Moonrise Kingdom. And so he is just committed to the Edward Norton project. Was there a better part for Edward Norton, I guess is the question.
Yeah, I mean, like he's basically playing a variation on the camp director from Moonrise here, like where it's like this kind of middle management.
Officious not
guy
necessarily the
with a
worst,
heart.
but not the best.
Yeah. So that was it for Casting What Ifs. For the Rick Dalton Award for the best fucking acting I've ever seen in my life, I gotta admit, I think it's Goldblum's reaction to the casting. I will say just in general, Goldblum being like, we have a tontine here, and then there are 637 amendments, footnotes, and last wishes, all of which the legality of which we're going to have to ascertain.
I was reading an interview with Wes Anderson, and he was saying how, some actors struggle to memorize dialogue, and that it's very, especially when it's written just so and meant to be delivered just so. And he was like, every time I work with Jeff Goldblum, he's like, he has it like that and knows exactly what to do with it and is a perfect reader of dialogue. We were talking about Sam Jackson with Tarantino last week on the show, and it's like, sometimes there is a man. I feel very similarly about everything he does in Life Aquatic. Jeff Goldblum is magnificent in Life Aquatic. He's so funny and just gets the character perfectly. He's great in this.
If we're going to talk about a perfect moment in an also otherwise perfect performance, I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't mention the moment when Monsieur Gustave is talking to Henkels and then realizes he's about to be arrested and just instantly turns and runs.
Yes.
Which is both a classic Wes Anderson visual gag, but the timing
she's been murdered and you think I did it.
Pause.
And these fucking books.
It's just exquisite.
It's super funny.
All right, so these next three categories, I added one.
All right.
Okay. I have Best That Guy Award. I have the Kyle Lowry Award for Best Seventh Man. He might not be the seventh man this season.
Seventh man on the Sixers?
I think he might be the seventh or eighth.
You guys
man.
are in trouble if that's your seventh man.
And the Dion Waiters Heat Check Award for doing, the most with the least. Now, the reason why I broke this up is because I feel like for me, Larry Pine is the Best That Guy Award.
Yeah, me too. Chris,
Sandy
look at
from
us.
Succession. Here's who I'm putting up for Sean. I also had it as the Sean Livingston Award, but then I changed my mind. Is the Best Seventh Man.
Okay.
Ed Norton, Harvey Keitel, Jeff Goldblum. A little bit more than a Dion. Too big to be a that guy.
I say Keitel. I love that performance. I love that part.
I'm going Goldblum.
I think it's Goldblum because I think the part is shockingly small, but casts an important shadow over the movie. And you were just talking about how specific and enlivening that everything that he chooses to do is. I think it's crucial.
The best Keitel moment is when Gustav praises his artistic skills and he looks around at everybody for a second like, aren't you impressed with me? It's the best.
And then the Dion Waiters Award for Heat Check. I have Schwartzman.
Yeah.
Owen Wilson. Bill Murray.
I have Lucas Hedges.
That's the answer.
That's what I had
The
to.
gas pump attendant. Yeah.
That's really good.
And I didn't realize, I'd forgotten that this wasn't Lucas Hedges' introduction to the West Cinematic Universe.
Moonrise Kingdom.
That he was in Moonrise Kingdom, which suggests that Wes knew something great was in this boy, and flew him to Germany for that scene. That is a flex, and the budget is still relatively reasonable.
Tony Romo, Chris Collinsworth, or Doris Burke for the director's commentary. I got two here. These are weird because they're like self layups, self alley oops. She's a cheaper cut, Jim, but there's more flavor.
It's pretty good.
Or,
yeah,
I see you, Agatha. You've put in time with the icing tube and the confection sugar, all under the watchful eye of your coach, Mr. Mendel. And now you're here at the carousel. Young love, you and Zero. Look what you've achieved, sir.
You just called Agatha Sir.
I also don't know why, I'm kind of making Doris way more aggro than she is.
Yeah, she sounded angrier.
Apologize to Doris Burke.
Doris is easily my favorite bit on the show in years. I think it is amazing. And honestly, I don't mind putting this on Front Street. You wondered aloud yesterday whether Doris is aware of this. I'm speaking to you, Doris Burke, right now. I hope you know that Chris is doing this out of love, but also sometimes when you're broadcasting a game, it gets a little weird. I need you to understand with love and respect that this makes me laugh very hard.
I see you, producer Craig.
You're pushing those buttons. You've been pushing buttons for a long time, sir.
Half-ass internet research. The painting that replaces Boy with Apple in Madame D's house is called Two Lesbians Masturbating.
Wow.
Really the only alternate title for the movie I could come up with.
Ralph Fiennes casually performed Gustav's life story for Wes Anderson as an act of improvisation, from being a Dickensian street urchin through his young life in East London, and like basically plotted out his biography, but they didn't really have like a place to put it. He told Wes Anderson told Matt Zoller-Seitz this in Matt Zoller-Seitz' excellent book about this film. And it just makes knowing that makes the performance all the more delightful, knowing that there's all these layers to the cake, as it were. Jeff Goldblum hung out for a majority of the shoot, even though he was done after like a week.
That tracks, I think.
Nice.
Everyone in the crew lived in this Berlin hotel together, took dinner together at night with a chef that the production had hired. So those are the main ones.
Did you pick up the one about how Keitel slapped Tony Revolori when he says "Good luck, kid"? And
like 40 times,
42
right?
times. That was the one time that Wes Anderson went full Fincher.
Wow.
Apex Mountain. Ensemble of mustaches. Has there ever been a greater collection of mustaches?
I feel like there has to be.
Cruising is in the conversation.
Not as many mustaches as you think, though.
Well, in the club.
Yeah.
In the background. Yeah. Glory? There are a lot of mustaches in Glory.
That's a good
The
one.
film Glory?
Yeah.
Didn't Matthew Broderick have a mustache?
The first two movies that came to mind.
Cruising in Glory.
Yeah.
Two greatest movies about men that I can remember. Why?
Should we also throw in Annie Hall?
Yeah, why not? Why not?
Is this Apex Mountain for exquisite portrayals of beautiful boys on the cusp of manhood?
No.
That's Stand By Me.
Yeah.
That's Cruising.
Any other Apex Mountains?
You're just looking right at me. I mean, on the serious note, it seems like we're suggesting this might be Wes Anderson Apex Mountain. I don't know if I agree with that, but it's on the cable car.
I think it's Ray
approaching
Fiennes' Apex Mountain. I think it's it could be in the real technical terms. I suppose English Patient or
no, this is better.
Voldemort.
This is better.
It's not about what's better.
Yeah, you're in definitional zone,
Apex Mountain
and we
is not a
can't go
qualitative
down that
thing.
rabbit hole right now.
Have you ever said that on this podcast before?
Yeah, you can. But it's not about
long time, first time.
It isn't the best work, right? But it is the most juice, right?
Yeah.
So if it's the most juice,
Right.
I don't know that this created the most opportunity for Ralph Fiennes.
Yeah.
I think that is probably The English Patient. For Wes Anderson, I think he rubber stamped another 10 movies with the success of this movie.
That's a really good point, because then at any point going forward, they're like, maybe
It could
we've
be
struck
this.
gold.
I don't wanna get
He's
too
shown
carried
proof
away.
of concept
Raise
here.
the ceiling.
This could.
But
that
I
makes
do
sense.
wonder what Dispatch had like a just pure theatrical release, right?
Mhm.
But coming out of
Streaming
COVID,
on Tubi at the same time it came out in theaters. Yeah.
well, to that point, Asteroid City had a theatrical, but was on.
They all were theatrically released.
Asteroid went to Peacock quickly.
Yeah.
But it
Quickly.
was theatrical.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other Apex Mountains? Revolori for sure, or was it Spider-Man?
No, Spider-Man, I think.
Spider-Man's bigger.
Right, because he's Flash, right? In the Spider-Man movies.
Not the Flash, Chris. Just so you know
Just
the difference. Yeah.
I'm just, I don't think any of the other actors, right?
No, and I wouldn't say fictional Eastern European cities. It's
It's Sokovia.
Sokovia.
Mhm.
Sokovia. Wow.
Obviously, a much more important touchdown for
Well,
the Watch.
Sokovia flew,
Yeah,
so
and then you have the
Zabravka could
Accords coming out of
walk.
it. You know?
Mhm.
Right, in terms of geopolitical, yeah, it's kind of important.
Cruz or Hanks? I'm going to go Hanks because he has been in a Wes Anderson movie. Who would Cruz play in this
Cruz
film?
as M. Gustav is just delicious.
Cruz as Dimitri would have been really fucking
He
funny.
could do that. He could do that.
Henkels?
Yeah, but would you waste Cruz just being like,
Yeah.
popping his head up?
I 100% would. By the way, one interesting exercise for Wes Anderson movies that we won't do today is retroactively recasting movies as his ensemble has expanded.
Oh yeah.
So Tom Hanks is now in the company, theoretically.
mhm.
So would he have played, what would he have
he
brought?
could
to
he have
those-
played Royal Tenenbaum?
Right. Or
Mhm.
or Herman Bloom, or, I mean, he wasn't the right age at that time. But it's interesting to consider that each one of these movies has opened the doors to more people being in these movies. And
Margot Robbie is now a part of that as well. And what if she were in the Saoirse Ronan part?
or what if she was one of the old ladies?
Good point.
They had
Madam
baby.
D. Yeah.
Then Chris is We had his attention.
Now I was interested. Now you want attention. Racehorse rock band wrestler or fantasy team name. I think Society of Cross Keys.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like a Godspeed You Black Emperor spin-off band.
Dude, I went through this. So tell me what this is. Are these references to the movie or tracks on a Mogwai album? Concierge freed from shackles. Stack of filthy carpets and a starving goat. A tricky war. Gunter was slain in the catacombs.
This has got to be a Mogwai EP.
It's 100%.
Racehorse, I like Boy with Apple.
Oh, that's good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have any others.
Picking nits. It's hard to pick nits with a movie like this just because like it's designed down to a frame of its life. I would note that the lamb is not in the original order, like we said. And I just wish there was more Agatha and Zero stuff. We haven't really talked about that relationship, and I think it's indicative of maybe like it not being like the thing you think about when you think about
I think it's intentional. I think that the importance of romantic love between young people is not the romance that this movie is interested in. It's about people with art or an era or performance or a physical place or an idea. And I think that's intentionally put into the background, right? It's almost overlooked.
It's related to my picking nit, which is like, are we sure Boy with Apple is that big a deal?
Did you prefer two lesbians masturbating?
I candidly.
That is actually a great unanswerable question, is what's more valuable today? Two lesbians masturbating or Boy with Apple?
You mean in terms of like happening in the world?
In the real world? Yeah.
Yeah, like if both of those paintings were on the contemporary
Chris,
art market.
Which are you clicking on faster? Two attachments
what
arrive.
has better SEO?
You're working 6 days a week and half day on Sunday. I know which one is working for you.
Boy with Apple, are we sure it's good?
That's a good. That's just
sure it's good.
It's also funny that this movie is so just excellent on almost any level that when you do like a cursory internet search for like problems in the movie, they are entirely like, it says this happened on August 7th, which was actually a Wednesday in 1938.
Oh, yeah.
I don't care.
Sequel, prequel, prestige TV, all black cast, or untouchable. I was untouchable.
I think this is the rare case, as I say with the hosts of The Watch, in which this would be a very interesting television series set in different years at the Grand Budapest Hotel.
But could you sustain the style?
No. I'm going to stop you there.
Well, Wes Anderson would have to do it.
That would be very exhausting for him.
He's shown such an interest in revisiting his work and expanding their IP footprints.
Well, he is willing to take chances on different formats in the short films that he did for Netflix last year. I mean, I could see a world where he was like, I'll do 6 22-minute episodes called The Grand Budapest Hotel.
And they're little vignettes.
1918, one set of 1928, one 38,
Chris, it's like
48, 58.
But with old people having sex.
Exactly.
That's what I want to sell Chris on it.
Yeah.
That's a very good take,
Or
Sean.
he could also make Elder Fucking, which is a series about
young
young
sex,
virile men fucking older ladies to get their money, which there could be money in that.
Hey. If they get
to
money,
get their love and their money.
The money, if it happens, it happens.
Okay.
Chris, I'm just trying to open your mind. I want your mother to be happy. Okay? It's just...
No way. Is this movie better with Wayne Jenkins, Danny Trejo, Sam Jackson, JT Walsh, Byron Mayo, Harling Mays, evil laughing Ramon Raymond, or Philip Baker Hall, or Bill Paxton from Aliens? Goddamn, Gustav!
This is what I want.
I didn't know I was dealing with Super Butler and a motherfucking set of front row aisle seats at Opera Toscana. You better keep your hands off those grand milfs and watch out for fascism, or Dimitri's gonna send your ass away a long fucking time, big boy. Get him the fuck out of here.
That was right.
Thank
you.
It's weird to do that from the hosting chair, I gotta admit.
Yeah, but it was right. I feel like Henkel sounds like Jenkins.
Oh, yeah.
You know? I think there's a
Bernthal
corollary
as
there.
Henkels would have been good.
That was what I was thinking.
Are you sure Byron Mayo doesn't want a little menage, with Madame D?
It would have been easy. Yeah.
Okay.
Just one Oscar. Who gets it? Right for Wes.
It's easier to say now because Wes Anderson has an Oscar for The Wonderful Life of Henry Sugar.
Yes.
He didn't have one at the time, so you would think that this would be a crowning achievement. But Ralph Fiennes is so fucking good in this movie that I'm going with Ralph Fiennes.
I'm going with Ralph Fiennes.
I think that's right, because I think that regardless of what we were saying about whether this is Apex Mountain or where it stands in the West Pantheon, like, he continually and consistently makes movies like this.
Right.
And Ralph Fiennes is so singular in this movie. I think it would be his.
Probably unanswerable questions. Do you think you would have been a lobby boy or a concierge?
Well, you got to start somewhere.
We all have to start somewhere.
We learned that Gustav started as a lobby boy.
Andy, is rudeness merely an expression of fear?
Yes.
I thought that was incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, my drive here really encapsulated that. There was a Rivian that was behaving in an insane fashion. And I was empathetic because I was like, this person is just clearly just paralyzed
Put the lights
with
on
fear.
top of the car, pull them over, citizens arrest.
Yeah,
Sir,
exactly.
please.
Like, what the thing is, it was EV versus EV, so it was incredibly macho.
I know you care about some
Yeah.
things in our society. Not Chris.
Any other unanswerable questions?
Saudi Chris?
Gasket, drill, baby, drill.
Yeah, why did the Grand Budapest Hotel get to persist in a Soviet society? Like, isn't that one of the first things that would go and be transformed into like a social services
Are we sure
space?
it's still called the Grand Budapest Hotel?
I think so.
Well, I do
think when
it's
author
because
goes to visit,
I think he has given up however many millions of Klubecks
yeah.
to get
Gary Kubek.
Gary Kubek.
Gary Klubiak.
Kubiaks
Gary Kubiak?
to buy the hotel. So he's like, here's the trade-off. I keep this. I try to keep it up and running, but you guys get the fortune.
There's also a tradition, I think, of like in Soviet eras, like they would keep one hotel for tourists or guests or whatever. It was probably every room is probably bugged.
Is that true?
But, yeah, I mean, I think that was
That's
accurate
great
in
info.
the sense that I once traveled behind the Iron Curtain in 1983.
No.
Yes, I did.
As a 6-year-old?
Yes.
You were taken to where?
I was taken to Budapest, to Slovakia.
You know what this means.
Yeah.
This is not Andy Greenwald.
You're a
this
sleeper
is
agent?
This is the no way out Russian agent.
I don't need to. I don't think I need to answer it
It's
further.
Yuri.
Yeah, I was there.
Any other unanswerable questions? This is very answerable, but Madame D was the secret owner of Grand Budapest Hotel,
Yes.
and she bequeathed it to Gustav.
In the event that she's murdered.
I see. Right, because it's in the second will. Best double feature choice. I have Ingmar Bergman's The Silence or Hail Caesar, which got brought up earlier.
Well, I mentioned The Lady Vanishes, which I think would be a good one. I would just recommend everybody watch The Earrings of Madame De, the Max Offals movie.
That's Wes's #1 movie, right, on the Sight and Sound poll.
It's a very, very big movie for Paul Thomas Anderson as well. And if you are interested in the way that cameras move in films, this is among the most influential movies ever made.
Also, William Eubank, when he was making Land of Bad,
Absolutely.
frequently
He-
went back to the
yes.
work of Old Fools.
He did. I would also recommend Grand Hotel from 1932. Would be a good one.
I think Avengers: Age of Ultron, in terms of its like unflinching vision of what is possible.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like the flip
Contemporary.
side. It's like a post-Soviet
Yeah.
society. What
Be
can
careful
really
what
happen.
you wish for
Yeah.
with concierges.
Yeah.
You think you're building these guys to be helpful.
Yeah. We'd stick with Pepper Potts, you
really
know?
true.
Yeah.
It's really just a story about a butler who stops saying yes. Speaking of stories about butlers who struggle with saying yes, my double feature was Remains of the Day.
Nice.
Very good.
Anthony Hopkins, but also a sense of like an institution trying to persist through global political changes.
Mm-hmm.
Not as many jokes.
In Remains of the Day.
In Remains of
No.
the Day.
Not as
No,
many
not a
gunfights.
laugh
The
riot.
blooper reel that they show at the end of the credits
Yeah.
is funny.
But
I think
Apatow was on set that day, so that's
Remains
why we
of the
got
Day,
great stuff.
I can't remember if it was that or Howard's End,
I can answer this question. This is why I'm here.
but my dad liked one of those more than Heat, and that was a real schism for
Let
us.
me tell you that it was, he came out in 96,
95.
95?
95 winner.
Yeah.
He liked, hold on. I know because I read those reviews, he liked both of them more. I mean, your dad gave 4-star reviews to both of those films.
He was a Merchant Ivory stan.
The Wes Anderson just popped out there, like my dad and I had a fight about this thing.
Yeah,
But,
'cause I was like,
but Remains of the Day was 93 and Howard's End
the
was 92.
LAPD, motherfucker!
We've talked about this story. This is that I first like I didn't meet Chris for many years after that, but I would come down to breakfast and my father would be reading the Philadelphia Inquirer and say, 4 stars from that Anglophile Desmond Ryan.
Anglophile, yeah. Andy and Red Z want an award for what happened the next day. We pretty much know. They go through it at the end of the film.
Do we believe this narrator?
Whoa.
So what part don't you believe? Agatha's.
Did an author even exist? Or was that book written by AI?
You know what Sean's saying? It was Agatha all along.
Oh my God. Coach Finstock. Oh, what piece of memorabilia would you want from this movie?
I mean, Boy with Apple, I think, is the...
You just said
The
that was a
stock
piece of
answer.
shit painting.
I'm just picking some nits. I was sure it was good, but it was valuable.
Okay.
I'd like a split of the champagne that they enjoyed during their meal.
That's nice.
That seems nice. The whole table settings.
Mendel's box.
Mendel's
Yeah.
box.
Mhm.
How do I get that funicular transported to my residence?
Rick Caruso could have done it.
You don't live that high up.
How did that vote work out for you?
I think I would go. I was going to make a joke about Dimitri's red slippers, but I don't want to draw any more comparisons between myself and Dimitri.
Your boy,
It's an interesting hero's narrative.
Coach Finstock Award for Best Life Lesson. The cheaper cuts are the most flavorful.
Love it.
Who won the movie?
I believe Wes Anderson wins the movie, even though Ralph Fiennes deserves the Oscar.
The pursuit of art and aesthetic principles above all else.
Yeah, I think it's Wes, and I think it's the totality of his vision on screen. You know, it's not that's an easy thing to say, but there is like a real like, man, you saw something in your head, and it is in its entirety on screen. So I think it's Wes.
But I think, yeah.
I do think art persevering in the face.
No, but I think the West thing too, because just to circle it all the way back to the beginning, like the gut punch of he was shot, I think is as perfect an encapsulation of why his style of storytelling matters. That there can be beauty, there can be aesthetic choices, there can be all this like ridiculous satire, frippery jokes, all very high-minded, but it is in pursuit of something a little bit deeper. That like he is not just he's not just set deck.
All right, brother.
I think most people's opinions or movies are largely shaped by the circumstances like in which they've seen them. And this movie came out in 2014 when I was in the middle of film school, and it just took over my entire class.
Did it?
Oh my God. Cinematography class was basically just people recreating Wes Anderson shots. Because I think there's something about Wes Anderson's filmmaking style that actually feels achievable because it's so specific.
Yeah.
It's long
handmade.
dollies, symmetrical framing. It's like an equation you can solve.
Yeah.
So that was a constant for 2 years. And it definitely wasn't the first Wes Anderson movie I had ever seen, but it's what really made me go back and watch all of his prior films.
That's what I was going to ask you. In school, was he an iconic figure?
Yes, he was like the
guy.
He's not indie, but he had that. The people, my friends dressed as Steve Zissou for Halloween in college.
Yeah.
He was everybody's like iconic indie darling guy that they wanted to be in film school. And I think this is his most satisfying movie to watch. I think the pace, the energy, the humor, the overt humor.
Yeah. It's so funny.
It's so funny. I think Fiennes, it's like one of my favorite performances I've ever seen. And yeah, I think a lot of people who are annoyed with Wes Anderson's like shtick are less annoyed by this movie than any of the others.
Yeah.
Because I think his like Wes Anderson-y pedantic style filmmaking is actually a part of the plot of this movie because it's like who Ralph Fiennes is.
Mhm.
So I think you can actually write it off much more in this compared to other movies where it feels like it doesn't need to be made that way, but it is. But in this movie, it feels like his style actually is a part of the plot of the movie.
It's about he's a very controlling filmmaker making a movie about people who have to keep themselves under control.
Yes.
Right? In Moonrise Kingdom, maybe, you would like to see a little bit more of like a rock and roll heart to that time period or something, or a little bit more of a let your hair down element to it.
It's something that I am always a little bit frustrated by with Life Aquatic when I watch it because it's ostensibly about Jacques Cousteau, but you never get the sense that you're watching something that Jacques Cousteau would have made or shot. You know, you have no feel for, there's like one little moment where you're watching a little bit of his film at the beginning, but it's a very good point that this is definitional to the character and definitional to the movie.
Well, but I think it's in some of those other things, you can see the building blocks of what inspired him, whether it's like the mixed up files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler leads to Royal Tenenbaums or liking Jacques Cousteau, or, you know, his parents having New Yorkers around the house leads to the French Dispatch. For whatever reason, picking up Stefan Zweig in the bookstore in Paris that he did touched him, and he feels like actively involved in the inspiration.
Did we mention Hugo Guinness in this
We
conversation?
did not once. We should have. Yeah, he was. He's responsible for a lot of this. I don't know if a lot of this film, but wrote like there was several. He's the co-writer. I think they came up with the story together. Wes wound up Did he write the screenplay?
He wrote the screenplay, but he was co-nominated for an Academy Award for the screenplay.
It's also worth noting that like when this is happening, Anderson spends most of his time in Paris now and living as an expat. I wonder whether or not that gives him a specific POV on like, I'm an outsider, but I am like romanticizing this place that I'm in. But yeah, Hugo Guinness, we didn't dap up. Sorry, Hugo.
I mean, when you have Dimitri right there, we have to keep the spotlight where it belongs.
Thanks to producer Craig. Thanks to Jack and Gahal. We will be back next week with a film. Oh, who knows which one?
Who knows if Bill will be back? Who knows?
Thanks, guys.